Hello everyone, welcome to the channel tonight. If you're hearing these words, take a moment to relax. Turn off some of the lights, draw the curtains, and let the room sink into just enough darkness for you to feel the chill brush softly against your skin. Breathe in, slowly, and exhale. Tonight, I'll take you away from your warm bed and lead you down to a place where only the wind whistles through stone walls. If you love stories that drift between history and shadow, hit subscribe, because every week I'll return to walk with you through the coldest corners of the past. You can leave at any time, but if you're still here, it means you're ready, so let's begin. Outside, the snow is falling. In the old fortress, a single torch has just gone out, and at the end of the corridor, a gatekeeper sits still, staring through the mist, waiting for something he himself dares not name. Tonight, we'll tell the story of the promise in the White Night. The wind blew through the tiny cracks of the old stone wall, making a sound like the sigh of the earth itself. Tonight, the snow fell so thick it covered even the footprints of the last gatekeeper still awake in the fortress. His name was Aaron, and they said he had guarded this gate for more than 20 years from when he was a young soldier until his hair turned white. The north gate, the one no one wanted to watch, opened toward the dead forest, where the wind carried sounds that did not belong to man. Every night, Aaron lit a torch, set it near his stone chair, and sat watching the fire burn to ash. He wasn't afraid of the dark, but he feared when it stayed silent too long. Tonight was no different, yet something felt wrong. As he stood to check the gate, he heard the sound of carriage wheels in the distance, iron grinding against snow. 3 riders approached, their cloaks crusted with frost, and between them was a prisoner, a young man bound in iron chains, head bowed. "This one's a traitor," the captain said curtly. "Keep him until orders come." Aaron didn't ask questions. He simply nodded, took the key, and watched as the soldiers disappeared into the storm. The gate closed behind them, leaving a hollow chill, as if a soul had just been swallowed by the night. The prisoner was led down to the eastern dungeon, where only a single oil lamp flickered weakly. The boy's face was pale with cold, but his eyes still held the light of someone who hadn't given in. When Aaron locked the cell, the boy spoke softly, his voice trembling from the cold. "If I die here, will you send a message to my mother? She lives in the southern village, near the wooden bridge by the stream." Aaron stayed silent. He had heard pleas like that 100 times, and never once kept a promise. He turned to leave, but the boy's voice lingered, carried by the wind through every heartbeat. On his way back to the gate, Aaron thought of his own son who had once been bound just like that, called a traitor, and died in this same winter prison 10 years ago. Since then, Aaron had stopped asking why, stopped believing anyone was innocent, and stopped thinking of himself as a man. All that remained was duty: guard the gate, wait for dawn, repeat. But tonight felt different. As he sat again by the fire, he heard a faint cough echoing from afar, weak, but real. He tried to ignore it, but the sound pulsed through the wind like a heartbeat. He rose, grabbed the torch, and walked down the long corridor. The damp dungeon opened before him, like the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow him whole. When he opened the door, he saw the prisoner huddled, hands bound, lips cracked, body shaking. The boy looked up at him, said nothing, just looked. In those eyes, Aaron saw his son again. Fear, pride, and a silent plea for someone to believe. "Cold?" Aaron asked, his voice rough as gravel. The boy nodded. Aaron hesitated, then unlatched the chain and pulled him out. "I can't free you," he said. "But if you stay here, you'll die. Sit by the fire." He dragged a chair, set the boy beside the dying torch, and closed the door. They sat in silence for a long time. The wind howled outside, mixing with the soft crackle of flame. After a while, the boy whispered, voice thin as breath, "I only tried to protect my village. They called me a traitor because I refused to give up my people." Aaron didn't answer. He had heard too many excuses. Yet something inside him shifted. The image of his son, the one he hadn't dared to save, flickered in the firelight, gentle and aching. "What's your name?" Aaron asked. "Rin," the boy said, eyes fixed on the flame, as if afraid it might die. Outside, the snow thickened, the wind hammered the shutters like cold hands. When the midnight bell struck 12, Iran saw the torchlight fade, then vanish. Darkness rushed in, pulling the cold with it until both of them shivered. He stood, fumbling for more oil, but the flask was empty. The room was left with only the pale glow of snow through the window, ghostly as the light of the dead. In that dim light, Iran turned and saw Rin sitting still, eyes closed, lips moving faintly. "What are you saying?" he asked. Rin opened his eyes and whispered, "I'm praying. For me, and for you too." Iran froze. How long had it been since anyone prayed for him? Since anyone spoke his name in the dark? He sat down, listening to the wind sweep the corridor, carrying echoes like distant bells. And in that moment, Iran felt he was no longer a gatekeeper, only a lonely man guarding the weight of his own regret. Across from him, Rin opened his eyes and said softly, "If I could, I'd like to see the sunlight once more." Iran looked up, at the cracked stone ceiling where no light had ever reached. He didn't answer. He simply took off his cloak and draped it over the boy's shoulders. Outside, the wind went still. Only the sound of their breathing remained two souls sharing the same long night that had no dawn. And at the farthest edge of the fortress, a promise was born, fragile as a breath, yet heavier than the chains Iran had carried in his heart for 20 years. The next morning, the fortress seemed swallowed by white mist. The wind still blew steady, carrying a chill that cut through every crack in the stone walls. Iran sat beside the dead fire, dark circles under his eyes, his hands moving in their old habit, rubbing the keys to chase away the feeling of frost. The smell of iron, smoke, and snow mixed together, forming a heavy air that made him feel like he was breathing in his own memories. From the watchtower came a shout. "The traitor will be transferred in 3 days." 3 days. Iran repeated it in his head like a charm, but it brought no comfort. 3 days to wait for death for someone young like Rin. That was an entire winter condensed into a few breaths. He lifted a cup of cold water, took a sip, but the taste of metal made his throat sting with bitterness. Something in him was unsettled. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the prisoner's face from last night, eyes that held no hatred, only one thing, the desire to be believed. Since when had that look made him tremble like this? All morning he walked the gate's perimeter, checking every bolt, every hinge, but everything was too familiar, so worn into his bones that nothing seemed new except for one thing: his heart was changing. By afternoon, snow began to fall thicker again. The sky was a heavy grey, the ground pure white, and between those two colours, Iran felt like he was living inside the void between meaning and nothing. During supper, the guards laughed and told stories about old convicts buried beneath the fortress. They said that on nights too cold, their souls rose up and wandered the halls, searching for warmth they'd lost. Iran stayed silent, his spoon sinking into soup thick as mud. They didn't know those souls weren't ghosts. They were memories, regrets, the echoes of men like him, the living who had nothing left to save. When night fell, he took a torch and walked the prison row again. The iron door groaned as he opened it, cold air rushing in like a flood. Rin was still there, sitting against the wall, head slightly bowed. When he saw Iran, he gave a faint smile, said nothing. "Still alive?" Iran rasped, as if afraid of hearing his own voice. "Still alive. But I think you didn't come just to ask that," Rin replied softly, like a whisper in the wind. Iran set the torch in its holder and sat across from him. "In 3 days, they'll take you away," he said. "I know," Rin replied. "I heard from the guards. I suppose they won't let me die quickly." He gave a thin smile. "Do you ever think some people are born only to die in the cold?" The question left Iran silent. He looked down at his rough hands, hands that had bound so many others. Maybe he had already died long ago, and his body just hadn't realized it yet. "I once had a son," he said after a long pause. "He was taken like you. I couldn't save him." Rin lifted his head, his dark eyes reflecting the flicker of flame. "Do you regret it?" "Every night," Iran said, simple and true. "Every night I hear his voice in the wind. He doesn't blame me, but I know, if I had another chance I would do it differently." Wind slipped through the cracks, making the flame shiver. They looked at each other in silence, as though the world outside had been buried beneath the snow. "I had a mother too," Rin said, smiling faintly. "She used to tell stories about a gatekeeper in old legends, the one who guarded the boundary between life and death. She said, 'If you ever meet him, don't ask to be saved, ask to be remembered, because to die forgotten is the worst death of all.'" He looked up at Iran. "If I don't survive, remember my name, that's all." Iran bowed his head. He didn't answer, just stared at the fading flame, feeling as if every flicker was a prayer dissolving into air. "Get some rest," he said. "Pretend this is your last night." Rin closed his eyes but didn't sleep. Iran stood, pulled his cloak tighter around the boy's shoulders. In the dim light, he saw that face peaceful, as though he'd already passed through the storm and knew he wouldn't return. Iran turned away, stepping back into the corridor. Outside, the snow fell soundlessly, as if the world itself was hiding something. Each of his footprints sank, only to be quickly covered. When he stopped before the great gate, the wind slapped his face, sharp as a blade. He looked up at the silent bell tower and wondered, if one day someone needed saving, would he dare defy his orders? That night the question had no answer, but in his heart the seed of rebellion had already been planted. In the dark cell, Rin slowly opened his eyes. He heard footsteps fading, the wind whistling through the vents like a voice whispering from another world. He smiled so faintly that only he knew it. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was only afraid of being forgotten. And somewhere above the frozen earth, Iran the gatekeeper was afraid of the same thing. He feared that when he died, no one would remember that he once kept a promise he never dared to speak aloud. The north gate of the prison had no travellers. For years it had become just another piece of the stone wall sealed shut and so cold that even moss refused to grow. They called it the Blind Gate, because since the fortress was built, no one who ever passed through it had lived to tell the tale. And the man assigned to guard it, Iran, had almost become a part of it himself. He lived in a small room beside the gate, barely wide enough for a wooden bed and a fireplace that was always cold. Every morning, he woke to the sound of wind sweeping through the cracks in the door, a sound so familiar that he no longer knew if it was the wind or his own bones creaking. The gate was made of black steel, thick as a wall, scarred with rust and old blade marks. On its surface lingered the damp scent of metal and sea salt, though the war had ended decades ago. Each time he looked at it, Iran felt as though he was staring into a mirror, rough, hardened, and stripped of anything that could reflect light. He sat on the stone steps, watching the snow fall. The flakes came heavy and constant for weeks, burying the fortress until it looked like a massive tomb trapped between white mountains. In the distance, the forest loomed black, filled only with the cries of crows like winter knocking on the door. People said that if you stood at the north gate at midnight, you could hear the footsteps of prisoners who died in snowstorms long ago, walking past without chains, searching for warmth that no longer existed. Iran didn't believe in ghosts, but he knew there were things worse than ghosts. The silence of stone, and the eyes of those about to die. He had seen hundreds pass through this gate. Traitors, thieves, deserters, the mad, and they all met the same end. They were taken down into the dungeons below, where no one survived more than 3 nights. He never asked who they were, never read the names carved on the wooden boards. His duty was to hold the keys and to feel nothing. But each year, feeling nothing became harder. At noon the wind paused, and the pale sun broke weakly through the clouds, turning the snow silver. Iran stepped outside, walking along the wall, his boots sinking into snow that reached his ankles. Beneath him, the earth seemed to breathe with every step. He heard the crack of ice, the groan of old timbers. He stopped at the western wall, where a great crack remained from an old explosion. Beneath it lay a narrow tunnel, sealed long ago, its stone patch slightly discoloured. He knelt and placed his hand on it. Ice cold but strange, as if something inside still held warmth. Years ago, a prisoner had tried to escape that way. They said he died in the blizzard less than 100 paces from the gate. After that, every passage was sealed, and Iran had never slept peacefully again. Whenever the wind blew through the gate, he swore he heard a faint thumping. Not strong, not fast, just steady like a heartbeat buried under ice. He had grown so used to it that when the wind stopped, he felt hollow. On some nights, he dreamed he was standing in the courtyard, the gate wide open. Beyond it was a dim light, and a tall, thin figure walking toward him, head bowed, but with eyes burning bright. Just as he tried to call out, the wind rose, and a voice echoed back, "Aran, do you keep your promise?" He always woke drenched in cold sweat, the key clutched tight in his hand. The question repeated itself over the years, hauntingly familiar, until he began to think maybe it was his dead son calling him. He never told anyone, knowing no one would believe an old gatekeeper going mad. But from then on, he no longer saw the gate as mere iron and stone. It was alive, watching him, testing his loyalty each night. When the evening horn sounded, signalling the change of guards, Iran stayed in place. The young soldiers passing by nodded politely, saying nothing. They feared him not because he was cruel, but because his eyes seemed to look through them, the eyes of a man who had seen too many die. A new recruit once asked, "Don't you feel lonely sitting here with only snow and stone?" Iran replied, "Loneliness doesn't kill you. Forgetting does." The boy didn't understand, but he didn't ask again. When night fell, the fortress went still. The wind rose, and snow began to seep through the cracks in the door. Iran blew out the torch and sat by the gate. He placed a hand on the frozen steel and closed his eyes. There was the wind, a distant bell, and beneath it all something else. Faint, quiet, but clear. Footsteps. 1, 2, then silence. He opened his eyes, staring outside. No one. Only the pale blur of falling snow. But the sound didn't fade. It crept into his ears, deep, steady, blending with his heartbeat. He stood, grabbed the torch, and stepped toward the gate. A rush of cold air swept through, like a breath from another world. And for a moment he felt someone standing on the other side, not human, not shadow. He wasn't afraid, only aware of one strange certainty, that tonight the gate would open not for the prisoners, but for him. Iran stepped back, lit the torch, its flame trembling weakly as if afraid. He sat down, eyes fixed on it, and whispered, "If you're still out there, wait for me." Outside, the wind howled through the gate as if answering him, and in the endless white night, a soul began to awaken. The old gatekeeper, Aran, had lived half his life guarding a gate no one ever crossed, a place where winter lasted longer than memory itself. No one knew when he first arrived, only that since his youth as a soldier, he had stood in that same spot, watching the same wall, listening to the same wind, guarding the same gate that almost never opened. Men came and went, soldiers changed, kings changed, whole dynasties fell and rose again, but Iran remained, as if his soul had been chained to that block of iron. Once, a new commander assigned to the fortress asked him, "Why don't you ask for a transfer? There's nothing worth guarding here." Iran only answered with one short sentence, because no one else could endure it. And then he went silent again, as if the question had never existed. Each winter passed, the fortress grew older, and Iran spoke less. The north gate sometimes stayed closed for an entire year, but he still cleaned it, oiled the hinges, kept it from rusting. On some nights, when the fire died, he sat staring up at the stone ceiling, watching light flicker across its cracks, imagining they were pathways leading to the sky, to the place he once believed his son's soul was resting. Back then, Iran still believed in redemption. He believed that if he did his duty well, if he let no one escape, if he became the most faithful guardian, then God or some other merciful being would forgive him for letting his son die. But forgiveness never came. Each time he opened the gate for soldiers escorting prisoners, he saw the same look in their eyes: fear, anger, emptiness. Only his son's eyes, those that held both the will to live and the acceptance of death, followed him still, step by step. On snowy nights, he heard the wind howl through the long halls, echoing like the cries of children. He once thought he was losing his mind, but over time he grew used to it. Madness, after all, was a way to survive in a place where warmth no longer existed. Once, he tried to leave. That year, the snowstorm came early. Winds tore down the fences. The southern gate was jammed, and Iran thought it was his chance. He packed a few pieces of dried bread and walked out before dawn. The snow reached his knees. The wind cut his face like knives. He took 10 steps, then stopped. Not from fear, but because he heard the sound of metal clanging behind him, the groan of the iron gate, as if it were calling him back. When he turned to look, the torches in the courtyard flickered like eyes staring wide in the dark. He didn't know why he turned back, only that when his hand touched the latch, pain shot through his chest as though the thing he was trying to leave was gripping his heart, refusing to let go. From that day on, Aran never left the fortress again. He accepted his fate the way he accepted the cold in his lungs and the clinking of chains in his dreams. Over time, new soldiers began calling him the Spirit of the Gate. They said Aran never slept, that he knew the names of every soul who died in the prison, and that whenever someone perished in a storm, he lit a candle to guide them home. He neither confirmed nor denied it. Silence had become the last skin he had left to cover himself. Those candles weren't for the prisoners, they were for him. Every time one went out, he felt a part of himself die with it. He stopped counting, because there were too many candles, and the nights were too long. Years passed, and Aran forgot the sound of laughter. His whole life had been reduced to 3 sounds: the clink of iron, the wail of wind, and the bell from the watchtower. The bell rang every night to mark the patrol hours, but to him, it was the heartbeat of the fortress, each toll a breath of death still waiting. Sometimes, he thought of himself as just another organ of this place. If he stopped breathing, the fortress would die with him. And there were nights, when the snow fell thick, he would sit by the gate and wonder if someone ever knocked. Would he have the courage to open it? That winter was colder than any before. Snow buried the paths, and the guards had to keep fires burning all day to keep the walls from freezing solid. Aran stayed at his post, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the white veil. He didn't know why he was still there, only that if he left, he would have no reason to exist. Inside him, something had died but refused to fade: memory, regret, and a promise never spoken aloud. He couldn't remember when that promise began, only that it was bound to winter, to blood, and to the sound of the midnight bell. When the final flame in the hearth went out, he sat in silence, running his fingers over the long scar on his wrist where, years ago, in despair, he had once tried to end everything. But the gate wouldn't let him. He woke on the cold floor, hearing the wind whisper, "Not yet, Aran." From then on, he knew the fortress had kept him not to punish him, but to make him wait for something. He didn't know what, not until that night. The night the bell rang differently, longer, deeper, followed by the sound of hooves and clinking chains. He rose, took his torch. Outside the gate, figures appeared in the blizzard, and Aran, the man who had guarded it half his life, never imagined that on that night, the promise long buried in his heart would awaken once more. That night, the bell from the watchtower rang through the thick air of the blizzard. The sound was different. It stretched long, metallic, groaning like a scream torn from iron by the claws of the wind. Aran looked up, peering through the narrow slit in the door. Firelight from the watchtower reflected off the white snow, painting the fortress walls with deep orange streaks that looked like bleeding wounds. He stood, pulled on his cloak, took a torch, and stepped outside. His footsteps echoed through the corridor, each thud sounding like an old memory awakening. At the end of the slope leading down to the main gate, he saw riders approaching 3 black horses. Their riders cloaked thick in frost, and between them, a smaller figure bound tightly, head bowed low. They stopped in front of him. The captain, his face crusted with snow, handed over a writ. "Rebel prisoner, caught at the border. Hold him here until further orders." His voice was cold and sharp as steel. Aran nodded without a word. He took the keyring and looked at the prisoner. Beneath the torn coat was a young man, barely in his 20s, his face smeared with dried mud and blood, his eyes still bright despite exhaustion. He didn't glance around, just met Aran's gaze with one that held no hatred, only a strange, steady clarity. In that moment, Aran felt the chill crawl up his spine, as though the boy had seen straight through him. "Take him to the lower level," Aran said, his voice rough. 2 guards dragged the young man forward. The chains clanked against stone, the sound heavy, spreading down the corridor and blending with the howl of wind outside. Aran followed, torch in hand. The flickering flame lit the narrow windows where the wind slipped through, making the walls moan. When they reached the cell, he signaled to stop. The room was damp, moss creeping along the walls, the air so cold their breath turned white. He unlocked the door and pushed the prisoner inside, locking it again behind him. The boy sat down without resistance, then looked up and asked softly, "Where is this?" "Fortress Hailmar," Iran replied. "The place where every sentence ends." The young man's face tightened slightly, but he said nothing more. The captain handed over the duty log, then left with his men, their footsteps fading down the hall. Iran stood alone for a long time after. He could hear the wind sliding through the cracks in the wall, but beneath it, there was something else. Breathing, metal shifting, chains dragging. He blew out the torch and stood still. In the darkness, everything felt more alive. He imagined the wind was the souls of the dead, circling the gate, unwilling to move on. The watchtower bell rang again, shorter this time. Iran turned, looking toward the courtyard. The distant torches flickered blue from the cold. He watched them and exhaled softly. The scene hadn't changed in years. Another prisoner brought in, soon to die, soon to be buried under the ice. His name forgotten before dawn. But this time felt different. He didn't know why, only that the young man's eyes still lingered in his mind. Nothing remarkable, just calm, but it made him feel judged. When Iran returned to his quarters, he set the torch on its rack, pulled off his gloves, and sat by the table. The wind rose again, and the fire in the hearth sputtered. He picked up his cup, but his hand trembled. Spilling water across the table, it froze instantly. He thought of the boy, of youth, of eyes clear as thawing ice. Then he thought of his son, the one he hadn't saved. A different cold crept into his chest, one that came not from the wind, but from within. The night deepened, yet Iran didn't sleep. He walked the corridor again, listening. A faint metallic sound chains being moved. He descended the stairs, torchlight quivering against the stone. When he opened the cell door, the boy was still there, sitting against the wall, awake. "You don't sleep?" the boy asked. "I don't need to," Iran replied, his voice low. The boy smiled faintly, the first hint of warmth in the dark. "I thought everyone here needed sleep to forget." Iran said nothing, then asked, "What's your name?" "Rin," he answered simply. "And yours?" "Iran." "That's the name of the wind," Rin said quietly. "In my village, Iran means keeper of heaven's gate." Iran frowned slightly. "Here, it only means keeper of the gate of the dead." Rin chuckled softly, the sound like wind brushing against iron bars. "Maybe they're not so different." For a while, neither spoke. The wind outside roared, the snow fell heavier. Iran stared at the flame in his hand, then said, "Sleep. They'll question you tomorrow. You'll need your strength." Rin nodded, but his eyes followed Iran until the cell door closed. As Iran walked away, his heartbeat thudded strangely in his chest. He glanced back at the door through the crack beneath it. The torchlight spilled in a thin golden line. In his head, he heard the bell again, not from the tower, but from deep inside his chest. He knew that from this night onward, his quiet had been broken. Something had shifted small, like a breath, but enough to stir the ashes within him back to life. And in the wind pressing against the stone walls, Iran whispered, "I've kept the gate too long. Perhaps it's time to open it." A young man, prisoner No, 27, charged with treason, his face still carrying the marks of battle. When Iran heard the captain read that line from the guard's ledger, he felt his heart sink slightly. Treason. A word too familiar, too old one that had appeared in the prisoner records for decades. To Iran, traitor was no longer a crime, but a kind of fate. Anyone caught by the crown, anyone who defied a royal order, anyone who spoke the wrong word in the wrong winter would bear that name. But there was something about this prisoner that Iran couldn't ignore. The young man's face was still youthful, but covered in dirt, dried blood, and ash. A long scar ran from his cheek down to his neck, newly healed, bruised purple from the cold. Beneath the torn coat, his shoulders were thin but steady, and his eyes showed no fear. He looked around slowly, unhurried, then stopped at Iran. That look, It wasn't the gaze of someone begging for mercy, nor of the dying souls Iran had seen so many times. It was the gaze of someone who had stood on a battlefield, who had seen death and no longer feared it. As the guards led him away, he kept his back straight despite the chains on his wrists. Iran watched, feeling a strange sense of recognition rise inside him. Something in that boy's eyes reminded him of another pair, the eyes of the son he had lost 10 years ago. That night, he stood alone by the gate, listening as the sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving dark streaks of blood across the snow. Inside him, something heavy began to stir, slow, cold, and stone-like. When he returned to his post, the fire in the hearth had nearly died. He sat down, hands clasped around a small cup of wine. The drink was weak, but enough to burn his throat. He drank to forget, but the wine only made memory return stronger. Images of past prisoners dragged away in the night. Bound in cold iron, their eyes dimming into the snow, marched through his mind one after another. He had once believed he was doing the right thing, that he was just a cog in the machinery of the crown, that he didn't kill anyone, he merely guarded the gate. But the years had frozen his conscience solid, and only when he saw those eyes again did the ice begin to crack. He set down the cup and looked out the window. Snow was still falling thick, heavy, blanketing everything in morning white. In the distance, the watchtower's firelight shimmered, breaking into fragments like the breath of someone dying. He thought of the young prisoner, the scar on his cheek, the look in his eyes. Treason. The word echoed in his mind again, but this time it didn't sound like a sentence. It sounded like a calling, faint but persistent. The next morning, Iran received orders to inspect the lower cells. He went with 2 young guards, each holding a torch. The wind howled through the corridor, making the flames lean and flicker. They stopped before the cell of the new prisoner. The iron door was freezing, thin wisps of frost rising from it like smoke. When they opened it, the stench of mould and old blood filled the air. Rin, prisoner number 27, was slumped in the corner, wrists still chained, head bowed. When the light touched him, he lifted his gaze. His eyes were red and tired, but still alive, like a small ember that refused to die. "You're still alive," Iran said quietly. "Did you expect me not to be?" Rin replied, his voice hoarse but steady. One of the young guards laughed. "Dying early would save you the trouble." Iran shot him a look sharp enough to silence him. He knelt, checking the chains. The cold metal clung to the boy's skin, streaked with fresh blood. He pulled out the keyring, adjusted the lock, tightened it again. "Save your strength," he said. "Someone will come in 3 days." 3 days, Rin repeated, voice soft as wind. "That's enough time for a man to dream one more time." Iran stood to leave, but the words made him stop. He turned. "Dream of what?" Rin smiled faintly. "Of a place with light, where the blizzard can't find you anymore." The iron door closed between them, its echo heavy as fate. All that afternoon, Iran couldn't shake those words. As he patrolled the gate, the wind whistled through the cracks in the stone, but for the first time in years, it sounded almost human. It sounded like his son's voice, when he was still a child, saying, "Father, when the snow melts, we'll leave this place, won't we?" But the snow had never melted. When night fell, Iran sat at his post, the keys in his hand, his eyes distant. He knew he was crossing a forbidden line, not one drawn by the crown, but by his own heart. Rin was not like the others. He didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't curse. He only sat in silence, watching the fire, as if guarding a secret. And Iran, the old gatekeeper, realized he wanted to know that secret more than anything. As the midnight bell tolled, he stood, took his cloak, and walked toward the dungeons. With every step, the snow fell heavier, as if trying to cover his tracks. In the darkness, the torchlight trembled across his face, revealing deep lines and cloudy eyes that still held one faint glimmer of the light of hope, something he thought he'd lost long ago. When Iran took the keys, the prisoner glanced at him, as if about to speak but said nothing. That look, fleeting as it was, carved itself into the old man's mind like a cold blade. In that silence, there was something that didn't belong to a chained man. Not fear, not despair, but understanding, something Iran had long forgotten. The young man looked at him as if they had met before, as if between them existed a shard of memory buried somewhere beneath the snow. Iran didn't ask. He simply nodded, signalling the guards to take him away. The sound of iron chains dragged across the damp floor, slow and heavy, each clink echoing in Iran's ears like an invisible reminder. When they disappeared around the final corner, he still stood there. The wind slipped through the corridor, making the torch in his hand tremble, its light flickering like the breath of someone dying. He sighed, closed the guard's ledger, and turned toward the gate. Outside, the snow was still falling thick, soundless, endless. In the distance, where the sky met the ground, the mountains loomed like giant corpses at rest. Iran knew that beyond those peaks lay the place he once called home, the village, the house, the sun, and everything that would never return. He wondered, if he died here, would anyone remember his name, or only the sound of the wind through the gate each night? He gripped the ring of keys tighter. The cold metal clinked together, a sharp sound that snapped him back to himself. There was no room for memory, no room for feeling. He was a warden, not a man who remembered. He'd told himself that for 20 years. But tonight felt different. When he returned to the guardroom, the fire in the hearth had died, leaving only cold ash. He bent to blow on it, but the wind forced its way through the cracks, snuffing out the last embers. He sat down, staring into the dead coals, and in their shape, he saw the young prisoner's face. Those eyes, that voice, the way he stood, straight backed against the cold. A strange feeling crept through him, the feeling of a man who had lost everything, suddenly realizing he could still feel at all. The wind slammed against the door, louder with every gust. Outside, the second bell rang from the tower. The tone was long and deep, dragging the fortress's breath with it. Iran rose and stepped out. The snow reflected the pale moonlight, washing the courtyard in silver mist. He walked along the outer wall, torch in hand, its frail light a lone spark adrift in the white expanse. At the far corner, near the north gate where the snow lay thickest, something caught his eye, a footprint, clear, fresh. He knelt, touched it, ice cold. But it wasn't from any soldier's boot. It was a bare foot, 1 step, 2 steps, then gone, vanishing toward the old sealed passage. He looked up, scanning the yard. Nothing. Only wind and snow. He followed the trail, his boots sinking into the frozen ground, each sound swallowed by the storm. When he reached the old wall, he stopped. There, between 2 slabs of stone, was a narrow crack like the scar on his wrist. He remembered. That was once a tunnel, sealed shut after a failed escape years ago. He laid a hand on the wall. The cold shot up his arm like a current. Suddenly a sound, the faint rattle of chains. He spun around, torchlight slicing the dark hallway. Nothing. The sound was gone as quickly as it came. Iran drew a long breath, steadying himself. Just the wind, he muttered, but he didn't believe it. He turned back. The flame's reflection shimmered on the damp wall, forming a strange shape, a face. Stone eyes, cold and hollow, staring straight at him. He stepped back, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. "Not tonight." He turned and walked quickly toward the guardroom. The wind howled louder, swirling around him like voices calling his name. As he neared the door, a gust blew out his torch. In the darkness, he heard something faint, someone speaking behind him. Iran. He spun around. Nothing. Only the moonlight spilling across the snow and the drifting shards of frost in the air. He stood there for a long while, listening, then gave a low, cracked laugh. "I'm losing my mind," he said softly. "Or maybe this place is starting to remember." Back inside, he rekindled the fire, but this time he felt no warmth. In the flames, he saw the prisoner's eyes again. That look still clung to him, as if trying to say something he wasn't yet ready to hear. He poured more oil, the fire flaring up, throwing his shadow against the wall. A thin, lonely figure, trembling within its own breath. The night was deep now. Iran sat still, eyes fixed on the door, ears tuned to every faint sound, but instead of fear, he felt something else. Something was coming. Not a man but fate. And it wore the face of a prisoner, with eyes clear as snow. The wind howled through the cracks in the door, carrying with it a sound like the moan of wandering souls. It wasn't the usual wind, it was long, deep, and rhythmic, like breathing. In the cold watchroom, Eran lifted his head, his clouded eyes glinting with alertness. He had lived in this fortress long enough to know that some nights, the wind didn't blow down from the mountains, it rose up from beneath the earth. He stepped to the door, pushed the iron latch. The hinge screeched, a sharp wail like someone crying out in pain. Outside, the courtyard was covered in white, snow piled up to his ankles, the ground marked with the hoofprints of the escort that had just departed. Above, the pale full moon hid behind layers of grey cloud, casting a thin silver light. The wind grew stronger, hurling flakes into his face. Eran pulled his cloak tight, but still felt the cold seep into his flesh. He looked around the yard empty. Only the traces of wagon wheels and broken torches stuck in the snow remained. No one. Nothing. But the moaning sound was still there. He closed his eyes and listened. It came from the direction of the dungeon, the cell of the new prisoner. A chill, colder than the wind, crawled down his spine. He walked slowly, each step sinking deep into the snow, every sound swallowed by the storm. When he reached the iron door leading down to the lower level, he saw the torch outside had gone out, leaving only a wisp of white smoke curling into the air. He bent down, relit it. The flickering light danced across the stone walls, and for a split second, he saw a figure glide past the far end of the hallway. He raised the torch, his voice hoarse. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the clinking of chains from somewhere deep ahead, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of someone about to die. He tightened his grip and moved faster, the torch casting trembling bands of light and shadow like streaks of blood. The scent of rust, damp moss, and smoke mixed together thick as fear. At the end of the corridor, he stopped in front of the cell door. It was closed, the bolt still in place. But the sound had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it made his ears ring. He stood still, his breath turning to mist, and then heard something else, very faint, a voice from inside. He leaned closer. "Mother." Just one word, blurred, weak, but he heard it clearly. Aaron drew a sharp breath and unlocked the door. Inside was darkness. His torchlight spilled in, revealing the young prisoner sitting against the wall, wrists bound, head resting on his knees. His lips trembled, as if speaking in his sleep. Iran stepped closer, the light falling on his pale, frozen face. The boy wasn't asleep. He had his eyes closed, as though holding onto an image in his mind. "You called for your mother?" Iran asked softly. The prisoner jolted, opening his eyes. His gaze cut into Aaron's, fearful, yet awake. I thought I was dreaming," he murmured. "I saw her, standing outside the gate, but she couldn't come in." Aaron said nothing. He knew that feeling, the one where you see someone you love in a dream but can't reach them. "Dreams here," he said quietly, "are never just dreams." Rin, the young prisoner, looked up, eyes dimly glowing. "This place, someone died here, didn't they?" Iran nodded. "Many, more than I can remember." "Were they buried?" "No, the snow keeps them." Rin shivered. The torchlight in Iran's hand flickered weakly, casting shadows across the stone walls etched with marks. Among those marks, Rin noticed strange symbols, rough carvings, cut deep with a knife or a nail. "What are those?" he asked. Iran followed his gaze, his voice dropping low. "Names of those who were here before. They carved them before they died. Some carved their own names, some carved curses. Some just carved the shape of chains." He ran a finger across an old engraving, the letters worn but still legible. "Leif Iran." Rin frowned. "Your name?" Iran gave a faint, smoky smile. "My son's. He was imprisoned here once. A winter just like this." The air in the room seemed to sink. Rin bowed his head, silent, as though the old warden's grief had seeped into the air. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks again, its voice mingling with the crackle of the flame, sounding almost like someone crying. "I'm sorry," Rin whispered. "Don't be," Iran said. "You've done nothing wrong." The boy looked at him, as if wanting to speak, but didn't. The two sat in silence, with only the wind and the faint rhythm of two heartbeats belonging to men who no longer knew which side they stood on life or death, duty or guilt. After a long while, Iran stood. Sleep. The night is long. Rin nodded. Before leaving, Iran turned once more. In the fading torchlight, the young man's face was half in shadow, half in glow split between hope and despair. When Iran closed the door, the moaning wind rose again, long and sharp, carrying with it the cries of those buried beneath the ice. He stepped into the corridor. The iron door shut behind him, its echo heavy, ringing in his mind for a long time. Iran didn't know it yet, but from that moment, an invisible thread had been tied between him and the prisoner. A thread spun from wind, snow, and the souls that could not rest. Iran pulled his cloak tight, looking toward the prison block where the torchlight flickered like the breath of a demon. He walked slowly down the long corridor, stone walls slick with moss, the cold seeping through every layer of cloth as if it wanted to bite his skin. Each step echoed, merging with the moan of wind from the northern gate. Here, every sound carried the breath of old souls. This fortress didn't just hold men, it held memories. The trembling torchlight cast ripples across the walls, revealing dried bloodstains and the scratches where desperate fingers had carved their names before being swallowed by silence. Iran had seen it all before, but tonight it made him stop. Something was wrong. The flame in his hand suddenly leaned hard to one side, as if wind were blowing out from the wall itself. A breath of icy air brushed the back of his neck, making him shudder. He turned. The torchlight struck the stone wall. Among the grey moss, a new crack had appeared, thin but long, like a fresh cut made by a blade. He reached out and touched it. The wall was cold as death, yet behind it he could hear something like breathing. He stepped back, holding the torch up close, his heart pounding. "Just the wind," he muttered to himself. "It's just the wind." But he knew the fortress rarely let the wind blow out. Wind here only blew inward from the mountain, not from the walls. If there was wind, it meant there was space. It meant there was a passage. He stared at the crack for a long moment, until the third bell rang from the distant tower. The sound pulled him back to the present. He turned and continued down the hall, the light sliding over the stone floor, glinting off the iron door of the cell where the young prisoner was kept. From inside came a faint noise, the scrape of chains against stone, followed by a weak cough. Iran stopped, standing still outside. The coughing came again, longer this time, wet, as if blood was caught in it. He tightened his grip on the ring of keys, hesitating. A gatekeeper wasn't supposed to care for prisoners, that was the first rule. But he'd already broken it the moment he'd heard that word "mother" escape the boy's dream. He exhaled, slid the key into the lock. The click of metal echoed dry and sharp in the dead air. The door opened and cold wind rushed in. Rin looked up, eyes sunken, breath shallow. "I don't need help," he whispered. Iran set down the torch and stepped closer. "You need fire." "Aren't you afraid?" Rin asked, his voice raspy. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid a traitor like me might cost you your post." Iran sat down, his old eyes fixed on the boy. "I've lost more than my post." Silence settled. The fire crackled faintly, its glow dancing on the walls, casting both their faces, one old, one young, like two reflections of time itself. Rin spoke softly. "Do you know why I was arrested?" Iran shook his head. "I don't ask. They don't answer." Rin gave a thin smile. "I didn't rebel against the king. I just refused to hand over my villagers when the soldiers came for labor." He drew a sharp breath, his voice trembling not from fear, but from anger. "They called me a traitor. But tell me, do you know what treason really means?" Iran said nothing. He had once asked himself that same question. Was rebellion defiance, or the act of keeping a promise the world no longer wanted to remember? "What would you do if you escaped?" he asked. Rin looked at him, eyes glinting in the dark. "Go home. If my mother's still alive, I'll tell her to stop lighting the lamp for me." A gust of wind passed through, making the flame shiver. Something inside Iran cracked. The boy's words dragged him back to the last night he'd spoken to his son. The boy had said, "Father, Don't wait for me if I don't return. But Iran had waited. 10 years, 10 winters, watching snow fall on the same gate. Do you think a man can keep a promise until he dies? Rin asked. I do, Iran answered. But I've no one left to promise. Rin smiled faintly, a weary smile. Maybe you've already made one tonight, you just haven't realized it yet. Iran was about to reply, but Rin had already closed his eyes, resting his head against the wall, his breathing slowing. Iran watched him for a long time, the firelight flickering in his tired eyes. He rose, stepped out, and pulled the door closed. As the latch fell into place, the wind in the corridor suddenly reversed, blowing out the torch in his hand. Darkness swallowed everything. He didn't relight it. He stood still, letting his eyes adjust to the black, listening to the wind slither through the cracks in the stone. The moaning sound returned, but now he realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within him. A low, hollow sound, like a soul groaning inside his chest. Iran braced a hand against the wall, drawing a long breath. What am I doing? He whispered. Guarding the gate or opening it? Outside, the night bell rang for the 4th time. Each toll felt like a blade slicing through time. He turned toward the main gate, gazing at the snow falling beyond, and through the haze he saw something move, a small shadow, slipping across the dark. He knew no one was allowed to leave the fortress after the gates were sealed. But for the first time, instead of suspicion, he felt something else. Hope. A fragile, foolish, dangerous hope that maybe, tonight, some soul was finding its way out of this hell, in his place. The young prisoner pleaded. If I die here, please, send a message to my mother in the southern village. The words sounded like hundreds of other pleas Iran had heard throughout his years as gatekeeper. Yet tonight, they made him freeze. The boy's voice carried no fear, no begging, only a quiet, haunting sadness. The torchlight flickered across his face, revealing the traces of youth worn down by war, but in his eyes still burned something Iran had long lost: faith. He didn't answer, only tightened his grip on the ring of keys, the cold metal biting into his palm, anchoring him to the present. A few seconds passed, filled only with the sound of wind slipping through the iron bars. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, each flake landing on the roof of the dungeon like a whisper. Iran stood still, looking into those eyes staring back at him. Something in them wouldn't let him turn away, as he always did. He saw again the face of his son, the boy who had once stood at the doorway, speaking of his mother, begging Iran to keep a promise. But back then, he hadn't. He drew a long breath, forcing the memory back into the dark. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Rin," the boy answered. "Rin of Morn." The name stirred something faint in Iran's memory. Morn, the village at the foot of the southern mountains, once known for its winter songs, where villagers lit candles by the river to honor the dead. Years ago, he had gone there with his son, in a winter far less cruel than this, Rin continued. "She lives alone. When the snow melts, tell her that I kept my promise." "What promise?" Iran asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. "That I would protect the village," the boy said softly, his voice trembling not with fear, but with restraint, "even if I was the last one left." Iran lowered his head, unable to look at him anymore. Part of him wanted to forget the story, but another part couldn't. He knew too well what it meant to defend something the world had already abandoned. The torch in his hand was burning low, the oil nearly gone. He set it down, the dim light stretching a weak stripe across the stone floor. "Sleep," he murmured. "It's too early to talk about dying." Rin gave a faint, tired smile. "No one ever sleeps peacefully here, do they?" Iran said nothing. He turned away, closing the cell door. When the lock clanked shut, his heart felt heavy, as if he'd sealed away a part of his own memory. He walked slowly down the long corridor, his breath rising in clouds. In his mind, Rin's words kept repeating, "Please send a message to my mother." A simple request, but it made it hard for him to breathe. Back in the watchroom, he poured more oil into the lamp. The light spread weakly, offering no warmth. He sat, running his hand over the ring of keys, the metal glinting faintly on the table. Outside, the wind roared louder, the snow striking the shutters like someone knocking. He looked up, half certain he saw a figure move in the courtyard, just an illusion. He chuckled quietly, but the sound cracked in his throat. Since when, he wondered, had he begun hearing voices of the soon-to-die? He'd thought himself turned to stone, untouchable, numb. Yet now, a single plea had shaken him like a child. He stood, poured himself a drink, took a swallow. The liquor was cold, bitter, meaningless. The mingled scents of smoke and frost brought back the last morning he'd seen his son when they took him away. The boy hadn't begged, hadn't cried. He had only said, "Father, don't let me die for nothing." But Iran had let him die, and he had never gone back to the village where his wife buried the child's ashes. "I kept the last promise of my life." The words rose quietly in his mind, like a curse unfinished. He flinched, for he hadn't spoken them, but it sounded as if someone had, right beside his ear. "No, not this time," he muttered. He stood, pulled on his cloak, and stepped out into the yard. The snow was so thick that each step he took cracked softly beneath his boots. The northern gate loomed through the white mist, the moonlight reflecting on its black iron surface, making it look like a great beast crouching in wait. Aaron laid his hand on the gate, feeling the cold pierce his glove. "He'll die here too," he said quietly to himself, "and I'll stay silent again, like always." The wind answered with a long echoing wail that rolled along the walls. For a moment he thought someone stood beside him, breathing in time with his own. Then the torch in his hand went out. Darkness swallowed everything, leaving only the pale shimmer of snowlight. He didn't relight it. He stood there, staring at the gate, his clouded eyes reflecting something deeper than steel, his own soul. "If I help him," he whispered, "it's treason against the king." Then another voice rose within him, softer, clearer. "If I don't, I'll betray my son." He clenched the ring of keys, the metal chiming faintly like a bell in the long night. He turned toward the dungeon. With every step the wind grew weaker, as if the fortress itself were holding its breath. Deep underground the young man slept fitfully, hands bound, slumped against the wall. And in that moment, Aaron knew one small act. A door opened, a flame rekindled could make him the next traitor. But the snow kept falling, and his heart, long frozen, had begun to thaw for the first time since the day his son died. Aaron didn't answer. He only stared at his hands, hands that had locked and unlocked countless doors between life and death. His fingers were darkened and calloused, small cracks covering the dry, cold skin like a map of the souls that had passed through these gates. Every scar was a story, every fissure a plea he once refused. Those hands had spared lives and taken them away. Aaron gazed at them for a long time, as though seeing his entire life written there, then clenched his fists, the sound of his knuckles cracking softly in the silence. "A gatekeeper's hands," he murmured, "are not meant to save anyone." The words fell like a confession. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the window shutters. He rose and walked to the table, where a small oil lamp flickered weakly, its fuel nearly gone. The dim yellow light brushed across a cracked wall, where a faded inscription was still visible. "No one guards the gate forever." Aaron had carved those words more than 20 years ago, on a night just like this one. Back then, he was young enough to believe he could leave after a few winters, that being a gatekeeper was only temporary, but time was merciless. It had made him forget he ever dreamed, ever laughed, ever had a son. Now, all that remained were duty and the cold. He sat down and unwrapped the cloth around his wrist. A small wound near his left wrist hadn't healed the cut from a prisoner's chain the night before. The blood had dried, blackened. He poured a bit of liquor over it. The sting made him grit his teeth, but he didn't make a sound. The alcohol soaked into the wound, its sharp scent mixing with the lamp smoke, thick and dizzying. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed. Behind his eyelids he saw his son again. 18 years old, brown hair, a gentle smile like his mother's. The day he was taken he said only one thing: "Father, if I don't come back, don't light a candle for me. Keep the fire for someone else." Aaron hadn't understood until tonight, when the torchlight in Rin's eyes showed him something he hadn't dared face for 20 years. He opened his eyes. The lamp before him had gone out. Only a faint moonbeam slipped through a crack in the wall, landing on the table. There, he saw something he'd never noticed before. A single snowflake, unmelting, lying untouched among the ashes. It glowed softly, clear, almost breathing. He reached out, touching it gently, and in that instant, images flooded his mind. The young prisoner sitting beneath the torchlight, cracked lips, still speaking of his mother, of the village beneath the mountain, where people sang in the snow. He spoke of nights when candles were lit beside the frozen stream, each flame a restless soul. "If I die here, please send a message to my mother." The words echoed in Iran's head like a bell. He pushed himself upright, bracing on the table. Inside him was chaos, regret, fear, but above all, the awakening of something he thought had died long ago. Compassion. He grabbed a torch and left the room. The corridor was dark, the wind stronger now, carrying the shriek of a snowstorm. With every step, snow fell from the vaulted ceiling, landing on his shoulders, melting into icy water. As he neared the dungeon, he heard a sound, not chains, but singing. A faint, trembling voice, but clearer song. He recognized it immediately, the morn song, the hymn sung by the southern villagers at winter's end, to send the dead into the next season. Rin's voice broke through the air, fragile but steady. "If the wind should stop, I'll still hear, the one who calls from beyond the white snow." Iran stood outside the door, his heart tightening. The boy didn't know he was singing his own farewell. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal, listening to every word, every breath. Then he unlocked the door and stepped inside. Rin looked up, his eyes shining in the dark. "You're not asleep?" "No," Iran said. "I can't." "Me neither," Rin smiled faintly. "No one really sleeps here, do they?" Iran glanced around. The torchlight flickered against the ceiling, revealing old black scorch marks. He knew what they were, the remnants of candles once lit by prisoners, praying for their souls to see light one last time. He set down the torch and sat beside him. "Do you still believe you'll leave this place?" Rin didn't answer right away. He stared into the flame, eyes heavy with sorrow, yet calm. "No," he said finally. "I just don't want to be forgotten." Iran exhaled. A truth, too sharp, too close. He understood that feeling better than anyone. He'd lived his whole life trying not to be forgotten, to be remembered as loyal, as the keeper of the gate. But in the end, they only remembered the gate. No one remembered the man. "If someone remembers you," he said slowly, "even after you're gone, then you're still alive." Rin turned to him, eyes so deep that Iran had to look away. "Then who remembers you?" The question hit like a blade. Iran stayed silent. Outside, the wind rose again, whistling through the cracks, carrying a long, mournful cry. His throat tightened. "I once had someone," he said quietly, "but I lost them. On a night just like this." Neither spoke after that. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the snow kept falling, relentless, as if the sky itself were trying to bury everything beneath its white shroud. In that frozen cell, 2 men, one old, one young, one jailer, one prisoner, sat together in silence. And though no words were spoken, both understood. In that moment, a promise had been born. Silent as a breath in winter, yet strong enough to change both their fates. Outside, the snow grew thicker. The entire fortress looked as if it had been buried beneath a white funeral shroud. The wind came in violent bursts, sweeping the ashes from the dungeon roof, swallowing every sound. Only the howling of the storm remained, and the occasional metallic clink, like bones knocking together. In the guardroom, Iran sat motionless before the dying flame, his eyes staring into nothing. He hadn't slept since the night before. In his head, Rin's words kept echoing about his mother, the village beneath the mountain, and that winter song. Every time Iran closed his eyes, he saw his son, Leif, sitting in a cell, singing that same song, saying he only wanted to be remembered. 10 years had passed, and Iran still couldn't forget that moment. His son's eyes looking through the bars, not filled with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it felt endless, the sorrow of someone who knew he wouldn't be saved. Iran stood, pulled on another cloak, and opened the door. The wind hit him like a blade. He squinted up at the watchtower. The torch there had gone out long ago, leaving only a thin ribbon of black smoke rising into the grey sky. He trudged across the courtyard, the snow up to his knees. Beneath his boots, the ground cracked faintly, crunching with each step. The air was thick and heavy, as though the world had been reduced to cold and silence. When he reached the gate, he stopped. The iron was buried under ice, its surface gleaming with a ghostly reflection of the pale moonlight, like a dead mirror. He laid a hand on the frozen bar. The cold numbed him instantly. "How long will you keep me?" he said, his voice lost in the wind. No one answered, but he could feel something inside the gate listening. He'd felt it before, that the gate had a soul, a memory, and that it was waiting for him to make a mistake so it could swallow him whole. Iran pulled his hand away and turned back. As he passed the dungeon corridor, he stopped by the iron door of Rin's cell. There was no torchlight inside, only darkness as thick as the night itself. He listened. No sound. "Are you asleep?" he asked, but only the wind replied. He stood there for a few moments, then unlatched the door. The hinges groaned, a long, cold cry. The torchlight spilled in, revealing Rin lying on his side, hands bound, his breathing weak. His black hair clung with sweat, his lips cracked and pale. Iran stepped closer and knelt beside him. The boy didn't wake, but stirred faintly as the firelight touched his skin. Iran removed his glove and pressed a hand to the boy's forehead. Hot. He was burning up. Iran looked around for something to help. In the corner sat a small bucket, a thin layer of ice on top. He cracked it open, scooped water into a cloth, and dabbed it gently over Rin's face and neck. Rin groaned softly, then opened his eyes. "What are you doing?" "Bringing down your fever. You don't have to—" "I know," Iran cut him off. "But if you die before sunrise, I'll have to dig another grave, and I don't want to do that anymore." Rin stared at him. "Aren't you afraid of punishment?" "I've already been punished," Iran said quietly. "For 20 years. The boy smiled weakly. "You're like my father, you know." He said the same thing, that he'd already paid for all the things he didn't do. The words struck Iran still. He pulled his hand back, eyes drifting elsewhere. "No one escapes the things they failed to do," he said at last. "Sleep. I'll stay here." Rin wanted to speak, but his eyelids grew heavy. Soon he was asleep. Iran sat beside him, leaning back against the wall, listening to the storm outside. It had been so long since he'd sat next to anyone. The feeling was strange, comforting, but painful. He looked at the young man, seeing in him the reflection of his own lost son. The same age, the same look, the same quiet dignity in the face of fear. A faint spark stirred inside Iran's small, but warm enough to wake a heart that had been frozen for 2 decades. In that moment he realized. He was no longer just the gatekeeper. He was the guardian of a soul still fighting to live. The blizzard still screamed outside, but within that cold cell, a fire had begun to burn again. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small strip of cloth, tying it around his wrist, a band that had once belonged to his son. "Leif," he whispered, "I couldn't save you, but maybe I still have time to keep one promise." Outside, the 5th bell tolled long and slow. A new day was coming, but the sun had never risen here. And Iran knew that if he ever wanted to see true light again, he would have to risk everything, even his life. That night, Iran heard the prisoner coughing, the sound of chains hitting the wall, again and again. The weak cough echoed through the thick cold of the dungeon, and he couldn't ignore it. It wasn't the moan of the dying he'd heard so many times before, not the sound of surrender, but the breathing of someone still clinging to life. Each time the chains struck the wall, the sound carried down the corridor, dry and hollow like wind blowing through bones. He sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for the ring of keys, then stopped. "No," he whispered. "It's not my business." But the coughing came again, harsher this time. He tried to close his eyes, but couldn't. In the dark, the cough turned into a cry for help, then melted into the wind, calling his name. "Iran!" He jolted upright. No one here knew his name, except the guards on his shift and his son, who'd been dead 10 years. He grabbed a torch and stepped outside. The corridor was freezing, the flickering yellow light stretching across the stone walls, carved with deep claw marks. Those jagged scratches looked like the traces of hundreds of hands that had once tried to claw their way out. He walked slowly, hearing his own heartbeat blend with the wind outside. When he neared the iron door, he stopped. The coughing ceased. Only the faint, trembling sound of breathing remained, like someone afraid even of their own voice. He unlocked the door. The metal groaned, a long, drawn-out wail. Rin lifted his head. The firelight brushed across his face, sweat on his brow, eyes shut tight from exhaustion, hands shaking from the cold. "How are you feeling?" Iran asked. Rin didn't answer, only rested his head on his knees. Iran looked around. The water jug was empty. A piece of bread in the corner had frozen solid. He stepped forward, laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. His body was burning hot, yet his skin felt ice cold. "You've got a fever." Rin opened his eyes, his breath shallow. "You don't need to care. I just want silence." "No one's ever silent here," Iran replied, his voice rough as the wind. He took off his glove, touched Rin's forehead, then pulled a small piece of cloth from his coat, dipped it in cold water, and gently wiped his face. Rin tilted his head slightly, murmuring, "Have you ever done this for anyone else?" "For my son," Iran said. "A long time ago." Rin closed his eyes, silent. The wind whistled through the cracks, brushing the torch flame until it quivered. After a moment, he whispered, "I heard that gatekeepers aren't supposed to feel pity. They say if they do, the gate stops obeying them." Iran looked up. "Who told you that?" "A guard. The one who watched over me before being sent away." Rin opened his eyes, tired but strangely bright. "Aren't you afraid the gate won't listen to you anymore?" Iran didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, at the old scars. "The gate listens to the loyal," he said slowly. "But loyal to whom I'm not sure anymore." Rin smiled faintly. "To the king? Or to your conscience?" The question silenced him. In his mind, the watchtower bell tolled again, each ring reminding him of the things he'd let pass. He'd once believed following the law was the only way to survive. But looking at the young man before him, he realized surviving wasn't the same as living. He poured a bit of water, helped Rin sit up. The boy drank, his eyes closing, his voice trembling. "I used to think justice belonged to the one holding the sword. But now I see. It's in the hands of the one holding the key." Iran froze, staring at him. In the flickering firelight, Rin's face seemed to fade into the smoke, but his eyes, those eyes of defiance, remained. Iran stood and walked to the door. Before closing it, he said quietly, "I once kept the gate for the king. Now I keep it for the dark." The iron door shut with a heavy clang. As he stepped into the corridor, a gust of wind blew out the torch. Darkness fell over him. He stood still, heart pounding. In that darkness, he heard something, not Rin's voice, but another one, farther away, echoing up from the depths below. "Iran, open the gate." He stumbled back, breathing hard. The sound vanished. Maybe it was only in his mind, but it sent a chill through his spine. He hurried back to the guardroom and rekindled the fire. When the flames rose again, he saw his hands trembling not from cold, but from fear. Not fear of the gate, nor the king, but of himself, afraid that he was beginning to forget why he was still here. He sat down, staring into the fire, its glow reflected in his weary eyes. In his mind, Rin's face appeared, merging with the memory of Leif. Two figures from different times, both with the same look, the look that reminded him he was still human. That night, Iran didn't sleep. The wind outside stretched on, endless, until it became a whisper calling his name in a dream. And in that fragile space between waking and sleep, he saw himself standing before the great gate, key in hand. Beyond it, a pale white light, and in that light, two figures, one tall, one small, waiting for him. But before he could step forward, the wind rose, and the sixth bell tolled, echoing through the night. He woke with a start. The fire had gone out. Snow had begun to drift through the cracks in the door, falling softly onto the floor. He looked down at the table. Among the cold ashes, a single snowflake had landed, unmelting, glimmering like the eyes of someone who had just promised not to let themselves be forgotten. He remembered his son who had once been captured and who had also died in this same winter prison. It was a memory Aran had tried to bury for 10 years, but tonight it returned, so vivid he could almost hear his footsteps echoing from the lower chambers, the dragging of chains, the ragged breath. That winter the blizzard had lasted 13 days, burying the road to the valley under snow. They had taken Leif because he had disobeyed, refused to fight when the king called for men. "He who defies the crown is a traitor," they said. Iran had been a newly promoted gatekeeper then, still believing the law was the only thing that kept order. He had bound his own son's hands and handed him to the guards. In his mind, an order was an order, and a father was not allowed to be weak. He still remembered that moment, like a wound that had never closed. Leif didn't beg. He only said softly, "Father, if I don't return, don't let anyone else die here." Aran had once thought it was a reproach, but through the 10 long years, it had become a curse, haunting his every night. Each time the wind blew, he could hear his son's voice, not angry, only endlessly sad. He had dug graves for hundreds of rebels, but he had never dared touch the place where his son lay. They said the body was buried beneath the ice of the 3rd sublevel, where no one went anymore. Some nights, the younger guards swore they heard singing rising from below the morn song, sung by the villagers of the southern valley. Aran had laughed it off then, though his hands trembled. Leif used to sing that same song whenever the first snow fell, his clear voice echoing through the courtyard, and Aran had told him, "Don't sing. No one here wants to hear joy," Leif had only answered. "If I don't sing, you'll forget spring is real." Now Rin, the young prisoner, was singing that very melody. Each note, each breath pulled Leif back, as if their souls had begun to intertwine. Iran sat in the guardroom, the firelight throwing his shadow across the wall, splitting it into 2, one hunched and weary, the other standing tall, its eyes cold and bright. He couldn't tell which one was real. Outside, the storm still raged. The wind scraping against the iron gate sounded like a child crying left behind. He rose, wrapped his cloak tight, took a torch, and stepped out. With every step, the weight of memory grew heavier. Beneath him, a thin layer of snow covered old footprints, his own, from 10 years ago, the night he led Leif down to the dungeon. His hands had shaken then, not from the cold, but from fear of looking into his son's eyes. And now, he was walking that same path again. Only this time, the one in chains was not Leif, but Rin, the boy with the same gaze. He passed through the second gate, the hinges groaning in a sound long and aching. In the corridor, the torchlight caught the icicles hanging from the ceiling. Every droplet that fell struck the floor with a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the prison itself. When he reached the eastern wall, the one that had been sealed years ago, Aran stopped. That was where he had buried his regret, the crack only he knew, and now it was widening. He reached out. The ice splintered under his touch with a faint crackle. A rush of air escaped, carrying the smell of damp stone and decay. He peered into the darkness, and for a heartbeat saw a faint glow flicker within, like the pulse of a firefly. Aran staggered back, breath catching. "It can't be," he whispered. But the light remained, pulsing softly, like a call. Then a voice rose, a song, faint and distant, carried by the wind. "If the wind should stop, I'll still hear." It was the morn song. The voice wasn't Rin's. It was Leif's. Iran's hand trembled, the torch shaking violently. He took another step back. Tripping over a stone, the torch fell, sputtered, and went out. Darkness swallowed him whole, and in that darkness he heard the song clearer than ever right beside him. "Father." The word froze him. His lips parted, his heart pounding. "Leif?" The wind swept through the corridor, melting the ice that clung to the crack. The gap widened, and something moved inside. He stumbled back, clutching his keys. "No," he muttered. "It's just an echo. It can't be you." But his heart betrayed him. Every note, every whisper of "father" came closer, stepping out from behind the ice. He sank to his knees, trembling, tears cutting through the cold cracks in his skin. "If it's you," he said, voice breaking, "forgive me." The singing stopped. Only the wind remained. Then, in that silence, Iran heard a sigh, soft, deep, mournful, like the sound of acceptance. The crack sealed, the wind died, He sat there for a long time, his hand resting on the frozen wall. In his mind, the past and the present fused leaf. Rin, the gate, the winter, all threads of the same invisible chain binding him. When he finally stood, the torch was out, but he no longer needed the light. He could see his path clearly now. The path that could only lead one way to open the gate and return the souls trapped here to the spring they never lived to see. The old fear returned. He had never kept anyone alive through the white night. That sentence echoed in Iran's mind like a silent verdict, carved so deep it made every breath taste of guilt. For 20 years guarding the northern gate, not a single prisoner had survived until dawn, when the white night came, the night when the wind never stopped blowing, the snow never stopped falling, and the souls of the dead returned to knock on the gates, begging to be let out. They called it the Night of Judgment. Iran didn't believe in ghosts, but after all those years, he had begun to fear what he once denied. Each time the white night came, he heard voices in the wind, soft moans from beyond the stone walls, ragged breathing like someone crawling toward the light. He used to think it was loneliness playing tricks on him, but tonight, everything felt different. Since Rin's arrival, the air in the prison had changed. The wind was colder, the snow heavier, and every sound seemed alive, aware. Iran stood by the dying hearth, the dim red glow trembling across the wall, forming distorted faces. The firelight danced, shaping itself into the faces of the dead, those he had imprisoned, watched, fade into the cold. They didn't scream or accuse, they only stared. That stare tightened his chest. He grabbed the wine flask, took a deep drink, but the taste couldn't drown the scent of blood buried deep in memory. "No one survives the white night," he murmured. "No one." Suddenly, a sound rose from the lower level. Not a cough or the rattle of chains this time, but a deep, low groan that stretched and stopped. He took a torch and stepped out. The hallway air was freezing, the wind twisting the flame, throwing yellow light against the damp stone. Each step was heavy, dragging the past with it. When he reached the turn down to the dungeon, he stopped. From the darkness came a sound breathing, heavy, hoarse, undeniably human. "Rin?" he whispered. No answer, but the breathing grew faster. He pulled out his keys and unlocked the cell door. The torchlight spilled in, revealing a sight that froze him. Rin lay curled on the floor, but in the corner there was another figure, a smaller shape, cloaked in rags, kneeling. Iran stepped back, gripping the torch. "Who's there?" No reply. He moved closer, the flame brightening, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. It was the corpse of an old prisoner, one who had died the winter before, still there, but the body bore no frost, no decay. Its eyes were open, and its mouth moved slightly. "Father!" The whisper was so faint the wind barely carried it away. Iran stumbled backward, his heart hammering. He knew that voice. There was no mistaking it, it was Leaf. His hands shook, the torch slipped from his grip and went out. In the dark he heard the clinking of chains, footsteps drawing near. "It can't be. You're dead." His words broke off. A cold hand touched his shoulder. Iran froze. "Father," the voice came again, clearer now. "Why are you still here?" He tried to answer, but his throat was dry. All that came out was a whisper. "Because I promised to guard the gate." A soft laugh drifted through the air, light as wind. "Guard the gate or guard your sin?" Then the cold vanished. The air warmed. Iran collapsed to his knees, gasping. When the torch reignited from the fallen embers, he saw nothing, only the bare wall and Rin curled in sleep. No one else. He sank to the ground, staring at his trembling hands, tears falling onto the icy floor. "Leif, you were right. I never kept anyone alive, not even you." He rose and looked at Rin for a long time. The boy was still breathing, faintly, and that terrified him. He feared that dawn would take another life. He left the cell, closing the door softly, and walked back to the guardroom. Each step felt heavier than stone. Sitting at his table, he opened the old ledger that had followed him for 2 decades. Inside every line was a name, and beside each name, a date of death. He flipped to the last page, where only a blank space remained. He wrote, "Rin, White Night," then stopped. The ink dripped, spreading into a dark smear. He couldn't write the next word. After a long pause, he crossed out death and wrote another word. Hope. His hand trembled, but for the first time in his life, he smiled. If this white night ends, he whispered, I won't let your name be written in this book. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the sound of the 7th bell, long, deep, and distant. Iran lifted his head, feeling as though someone was listening. He stood, faced the northern gate, and whispered, Leif, my son, tonight, I'll keep my promise. The wind answered with a strange, gentle warmth, and within that breath, he heard a faint laugh like an acceptance from somewhere far beyond. When the midnight bell struck 12, the iron gate groaned, and snow poured in like smoke. The chimes echoed through the fortress, heavy and slow, like the heartbeat of a demon. Iran jolted awake from a fevered dream, his head soaked in cold sweat. The fire in the hearth had long died, leaving only grey ash and the faint scent of old smoke. He heard the wind howling through the cracks in the walls, and then something that sounded like breathing, but not from the living. He stood, trembling as he lit his torch, the flickering light casting his hollow, aged face in golden shadow. The door shook violently, as if unseen hands were pounding from outside. He gripped the ring of keys tightly, their clinking echoing with the wind. The gate groaned again, relentless. Iran stepped closer, torch trembling in his grasp, and peered through the narrow slit. Outside, the snow was a churning white storm, thick as fog. Through it, he saw a figure, a shape standing amid the blizzard, facing the fortress. His heart stopped. The silhouette was thin, cloaked, head bowed low, but there was something achingly familiar about it. He squinted, stepped back. No, it couldn't be. It was Leif. He rubbed his eyes, the light blurring everything. But when he looked again, the figure was still there, motionless, snow gathering on its shoulders. He heard the voice not through his ears, but inside his mind. Father. A single word, soft as breath. Iran's chest tightened. The cold seeped through the cracks in the door, curling around his legs like frozen fingers pulling him down. No, it can't be, he stammered, backing away. You're dead. You can't. But the voice came again, clearer now. Open the gate, father. His torch wavered, nearly slipping from his hand. The gate screamed, metal grinding against metal, like a cry of pain. Iran collapsed to his knees, his whole body trembling. From below came Rin's voice. Iran, what's happening? He didn't answer. His breath came in sharp bursts, sweat pouring though the air was freezing. No, don't open it, he whispered to himself, but his hand still clutched the keys. His fingers no longer obeyed him. They moved on their own, as if guided by another will. He fought against it, forcing his hand down, but then a faint scream rose from outside, freezing him in place. That voice, he knew it too well. Father, I'm cold. Open the door for me, Iran shouted, hurling the keys to the ground. The clatter rang through the hall. The wind fell silent. The entire world seemed to stop. He gasped for air, collapsing against the floor, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. The torchlight danced wildly, flickering with his fear. Moments later, hurried footsteps echoed. Rin appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand braced on the wall, eyes wide. Did you hear something? Iran looked at him, lips trembling, unable to speak. Rin stepped closer, staring at the sealed gate. Someone out there? He shook his head, but his haunted eyes betrayed the truth. The White Knight, Iran whispered. They've come back. Rin frowned. Who? The ones who died here. They never left. When the White Knight comes, they return to reclaim their way out. Rin gave a faint laugh, though fear flickered in his eyes. I thought that was just an old guard's tale. So did I, Iran rasped, until I saw my son standing outside that gate. Rin froze. Silence fell over them both. Only their heartbeats filled the air. Then Rin stepped forward, placing a hand on Iran's shoulder. Maybe it was just a vision. You're exhausted. Iran let out a dry, broken laugh. If it were, I'd welcome it. But I know better. What dies on the White Knight never truly fades. The door shuddered again, softly this time, as though touched by a hand. Rin jumped, gripping Aaron's torch hand. "If that's a spirit, we can't open it, right?" "No," Aaron whispered. "If we open it, the wind will take everything me, you, this place." Rin stared at him, the torchlight reflecting in his eyes, burning like the only flame left in this frozen fortress. "Then we'll keep it closed," he said firmly. Aaron looked at the young man, the one who should have been trembling, but instead stood tall before the storm, eyes bright with defiance. He nodded, a weary smile ghosting across his lips. "All right," he murmured. "This white night, I won't face it alone." The wind roared again, and the gate bellowed like a beast. Two men, one old, one young, stood before it, amid the screaming storm, watching each other in silence. And in that moment, on the edge between life and death, they both understood. Tonight would not be like any night before. The wind whipped across his face, cold enough to numb, and in that moment, Aaron heard it clearly. "Please, don't let me die like this." The words pierced his mind like a blade driven straight into his heart. Rin's voice wasn't a plea for mercy, it was the cry of a soul still clinging to life, a sound caught between breath, between existence and despair. Aaron froze, still gripping the dying torch. The weak flame flickered before him, casting light on the cold stone floor and the snow drifting in through the cracks of the door. He looked through the bars of the cell. Rin sat hunched, his shoulders trembling, his breath so faint that each inhale sounded like knives scraping through his lungs. He was no longer a prisoner, just a body waiting to be devoured by winter. Aaron stood there for a long time, his heartbeat slow but heavy, every thud carrying a question he couldn't answer. Would he stand by again and watch another die in this white night? He remembered Leif, his son, who had shivered and coughed in the same way, in the same cold, and by morning they had carried up a body covered by a blanket. The memory struck him so hard it felt like he couldn't breathe. He looked at the torch, the flame was fading, and then at the iron door before him. His hand clenched the keyring, the metal scraping against itself in a shrill, cutting sound. "I've stayed silent too long," he whispered, his voice shaking. Then he slid the key into the lock. The metallic click echoed through the dark hall. The heavy door creaked open, and the cold wind surged in, snuffing out the torch. In the darkness, Aaron could only hear Rin's faint breaths and the pounding of his own heart. He stepped closer and knelt beside him. "Can you still hear me?" Rin opened his eyes, clouded, but with a fragile spark of light still within. "I don't want to die here," he rasped. "I still have a promise." Aaron laid a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor of a body fading away. "I know," he murmured. "I have a promise too, one I never kept." He lifted Rin up, taking off his own cloak and wrapping it around the boy's shoulders. The cold hit his skin like knives, but he didn't care. "I'm not worth it," Rin whispered, voice breaking. "Don't say that," Aaron replied. "It's not for you, it's for me. Some things, if I don't do them tonight, I'll never again have the courage to face the light." He helped Rin out of the cell, each step heavy and laboured. The corridor was pitch black, their breath leaving pale trails of smoke in the thick, frozen air. The wind moaned through the ceiling, sounding like the wails of ghosts keeping watch. As they turned the corner, Rin whispered, "Aren't you afraid?" "I am," Aaron said, "but I'm more afraid of being a coward again than of punishment." Rin smiled weakly and said no more. Aaron guided him into the back watchroom, where a small fire still lingered. He rekindled it, and the flames leapt up, casting warm light on their faces, one old, one young, both carved by time and loss. Rin drew close to the fire, his trembling hands reaching for its warmth. The reflection of the flame shimmered in his eyes like water. "I used to dream of seeing a fire like this," he said softly. "In my village, they called it the winter soul. Anyone who saw it after the white night would live through the year." "And you?" Aaron asked. "How long has it been since you saw a warm flame?" "Since my son died," Aaron said hoarsely. "I've put out every fire in my heart since then." Rin nodded slowly. "Then tonight," he said, "let me light one for you." He gathered the dry straw and added wood. The fire burned brighter, spreading warmth through the room. Iran felt the stiffness in his hands begin to ease. For the first time in years, he could hear his heartbeat, a sound he'd forgotten. Outside, the snow still fell, but there were no more cries. The whole fortress seemed to listen, as if it too was trying to warm itself with the last human breath left inside its walls. Iran watched Rin, his voice low. "You know," he said, "if I open that gate now, they'll hang me for treason. But if I don't, I think I'll die before sunrise because I can't stand this silence any longer." Rin looked up, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "If you open it, at least one of us will live. If you don't, we both die here. Do you call that choice or punishment?" The question froze him. He looked into the fire, its glow flickering red, reflected in his eyes like mirrors of blood and flame. "Maybe," he whispered, "only by breaking the law can I finally keep my promise." Outside, the 8th bell tolled slow, deep, drawn out like the final breath of a soul. Iran rose, took up the torch, the light falling across his weathered face, but his eyes shone brighter than ever before. Rin looked at him and asked quietly, "What will you do?" Iran turned, his voice rough but steady. "Keep my final promise and open the gate for spring to pass through." He rose suddenly, grabbed the torch, and stepped into the dark stone hallway. Iran's footsteps echoed against the damp floor, blending with the wind that hissed through the narrow cracks in the walls. Each step sounded like fate knocking cold and heavy, one beat at a time. The torchlight flickered across the ceiling, stretching his shadow long and distorted, as if another figure was walking beside him. He didn't look back, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he knew if he turned around, what he saw might no longer be himself. The corridor leading to the lowest cell was colder than usual. His breath turned into thick white mist, hanging in the air. The smell of mould, rusted iron, and old blood filled his lungs so familiar it made his throat tighten. For years, Iran had believed himself numb, that fear and pity had long died within him. But tonight, they came alive again, wild, raw, and real enough to make him tremble. He stopped before the final door, the one that held Rin. The light of the torch shimmered against the bars, revealing the young prisoner curled in the corner, shivering. Iran said nothing, just watched. Rin's hair clung to his skin with sweat. His lips were blue, his pale skin almost translucent. But in his eyes, there was still light, the kind that belongs to someone who refuses to surrender. Iran pulled the bolt. The metal shrieked. Rin flinched and looked up, breathing hard. What are you doing here?" "So you don't die in the dark," Iran answered, his voice low and rough. He stepped inside, bringing the torch closer. The light brushed Rin's eyes, revealing a face too young to be broken this way. Rin tried to smile weak, but real. "How long do you think I've got left?" Iran didn't reply. He wedged the torch into the wall and lifted Rin to his feet. The boy nearly collapsed, but Iran caught him. "Stand," he said. "You can't fall here. Falling here means disappearing." "Disappearing," Rin echoed softly, then gave a faint laugh. "So where are you taking me?" "To the fire," Iran said. "Before you die, you should at least feel warmth once." He guided Rin down the corridor, step by slow step. The wind seeped through, carrying sounds that resembled sighs from something unseen. Along the wall, the old carvings caught the trembling light, hundreds of names, scratched lines, and fragments of words. The White Knight. That year. Rin glanced at them, his voice barely a whisper. "They all died?" Iran nodded. "Everyone. When the White Knight comes, the blizzard sweeps through, and this prison takes the souls of those who never got to sleep. And you stayed here?" "I thought I could keep the gate closed forever," Iran said. "But every time I save one life, another dies in its place." Rin stayed silent. Together they reached the small room with a hearth. Iran set him down and knelt to light the fire. Sparks leapt, and the trembling light revealed his face deep wrinkles, dim eyes, and hands still stained with old blood. Rin watched him, voice hoarse. "You know, you could leave. No one forces you to stay in this place." Iran gave a dry laugh. "Leave?" I tried. "Every time I reach the gate, the wind calls my name. When my son died here, I knew I'd never escape this fortress again." "Your son?" Rin asked softly. But Aran said nothing, eyes fixed on the growing flames. He was imprisoned here, branded a traitor, like you. And I was the one who locked the gate. Silence fell. Only the wind howled outside. When I opened the gate for him that final time, Aran said slowly, I thought I was doing right. That law mattered more than blood. But that night, I heard him coughing in the cell, just like you did earlier. And by morning, all I had left was a frozen body. He looked up, eyes bloodshot, voice breaking. I swore I'd never let anyone else die under this winter again. But that vow was a lie. Every year, I dig another grave. Rin reached out, his frail hand resting on Iran's. His voice was weak but firm. Then don't let me be the next one. Iran looked at him, and in those eyes he saw no fear, only a faint, defiant faith. A faith he thought had vanished from this place long ago. If I help you, he whispered, I'll be defying the king. If you don't, Rin said, you'll be defying your own soul. The words hit Iran like a hammer to the chest. He stared into the fire, then rose, resolve settling in his bones. Listen, Rin. Behind the old wall there's a passage. Half buried, but if you can crawl through, it'll lead you to the southern ridge. From there, if the wind's kind, you might find the light. And you? Rin asked. I'll stay, Iran replied. Someone has to guard the fire. Rin tried to speak, but Iran raised a hand. Not yet, he said. When the 10th bell rings, the gate's latch will loosen. That's when the wind changes. Go then, and don't look back. The boy's lips trembled. You're committing a crime for me. No, Iran murmured, a sorrowful smile on his lips. I'm atoning for one. Outside, the blizzard howled, as if the heavens themselves resisted their will. But Iran no longer hesitated. In the flickering light, he gripped the ring of keys, and for the first time in 20 years, his eyes burned with fire again. The white night had truly begun, and this time he would not let winter win. Under the trembling firelight, he saw the young prisoner huddled, lips blue, eyes fixed on him as if waiting for a miracle. That look froze Iran in place. Those eyes held no anger, no fear, only a fragile, trembling faith so pure it made him feel ashamed. For years, he had grown used to other eyes, the eyes of hatred, of despair, of those who already knew they would die. But this one was different. It didn't beg for life, it only asked whether he was still human. Aran drew in a slow breath, feeling the cold slice through his chest. He set the torch into its holder, knelt, and gripped the ring of keys. Inside him, a battle raged between duty and conscience. The 9th bell tolled long, heavy. He knew what it meant. The middle of the white night, when the gates began to tremble, and the souls of the restless dead tapped softly against the stone. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and whispered, I can't free you, but I can give you one warm night. Rin's brow furrowed in confusion, then Iran slid the key into the lock. The sound of metal meeting metal echoed slow and sharp. The door creaked open, and cold air poured from the cell like mist. Aran stepped inside, bending down to lift Rin. The boy was so light it felt like lifting a child. Come on, he said, voice low and rough. I'll take you to the fire. Rin leaned weakly against him, gasping. Aren't you afraid? If they find out? I've been afraid long enough, he answered. Now I fear only one thing, that I'll hear the dead call my name again tomorrow night. They walked into the corridor, where the wind howled through the cracks. Each step left a faint print on the thin snow, small marks swallowed by the vast darkness. The torchlight danced on the walls, revealing hundreds of overlapping carvings, names, symbols, fragments of desperate words. Rin traced them gently with his fingers. These are the ones who never survived the white night, Iran said. They left behind the only thing that endures memory. Rin brushed his nail against a half-faded inscription. Era. He didn't finish reading before Aran turned away, his voice falling low. My wife's name. She died while I was still in the army. A winter like this one. They were silent. The wind outside grew louder, circling the hall like a lament. When they reached the watchroom, Aran helped Rin sit near the hearth and rekindled the fire. The faint flame flickered to life. its light spilling over his cracked, calloused hands, his fingers trembling as they touched the wood. Rin watched him, his lips trembling. "You don't have to do this. I'm a criminal. I don't deserve saving." "I'm not saving you," Iran said slowly. "I'm saving what's left of the man I used to be." He added more wood, and the flames rose higher, casting two reflections, two worlds in their eyes. One that had lived too long in guilt, and one still trying to escape it. They sat in silence, the only sounds the popping of the fire and the wind battering the door. After a moment, Rin said, "You know, in my village, they believe if someone does a good deed on the coldest night of the year, they'll be forgiven in the next life." Iran smiled faintly, a rare, sorrowful smile. "I don't believe in a next life, and if there is one, I doubt I'll be allowed through its gate." "Then tonight," Rin said softly but firmly, "pretend this is your beginning. No one stays chained to their sins if they dare to face them." Iran looked at him, the firelight reflecting on that young face, those eyes clear as snow. "You speak as if you've lived a whole life already," he murmured. "No," Rin replied. "I only know one thing, that the real prison isn't made of stone. It's the fear inside me. And you're a prisoner too. The difference is, no one can see the bars around you." The words silenced Iran. He gazed into the flames and saw in their flickering glow the reflection of his own face, hollow, weary, and, strangely, a little freed. "You're the first to ever speak to me like this," he said quietly. "The others, they only cried, or cursed." "Because they didn't see you as a man," Rin answered. "They saw the gatekeeper. But I see someone else." Iran was about to speak, but the wind surged, making the flames flare wildly. Outside, the 10th bell rang deep, long, distant. They looked at each other. "It's time," Iran said. He stood, pulling the ring of keys from his coat, his knuckles white around it. Rin stared at him, eyes full of emotion. "Are you sure?" "Nothing's sure," he said, "but I won't die without keeping one promise." He turned toward the door. The wind roared again. Lightning flashed beyond the walls, and the snow outside rolled like a sea. Iran stopped, looked back one last time. "When I open the gate, you run. Don't look back. Don't speak. The gate will open only once, and I'll close it forever." Rin nodded, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. "You'll die," he whispered. "Maybe," Iran said, smiling faintly. "But if you live, then my death will mean something." Then he turned away, walking down the long corridor, where the wind became a chorus of whispers calling his name. With every step closer to the gate, the ground trembled, the walls moaned, and within him, the last ember of his soul flared to life. The white night had never felt so long. Iran stayed silent for a long time, then unlatched the chain and pulled him closer to the small fire in the watchroom. The clink of metal was soft, but in that silence, it sounded like a declaration of rebellion. He didn't look at Rin, only bowed his head, keeping a firm grip on the chain so that if anyone passed by, he could pretend he was simply doing his duty. But no one came. There was only the wind whistling through the cracks, the sound of snow sliding off the roof, and the pounding of his heart loud and heavy, like a drum of fate. Rin staggered as he stood, his legs too weak to hold him, but Iran caught him, guiding him toward the fire. He set him down, then rekindled the flame. The flickering light spread across the walls, revealing old cracks and burn marks from years past. In that small room, the smell of burning wood, mixed with human warmth so real it made Iran feel as though he had just woken from a long, cold dream. Rin sat still, eyes closed, lips trembling as if wanting to speak but too weak to form words. Iran poured a bit of warm water from the kettle and handed it to him. "Drink," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're breaking the law," Rin whispered, voice faint but with a flicker of a smile. "Breaking the law?" Iran gave a hollow laugh. "I've lived my whole life by the law, and that law is what killed my son." Rin lifted his gaze, eyes shining in the firelight. "Your son?" "Yes," Iran murmured. "He once sat right where you are now, on a night just like this. But I didn't unlock his chains. I just stood outside, listening to him cough, until it stopped. The room went still. The fire crackled softly, each snap of wood like bones breaking. Rin looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, Maybe tonight you've redeemed a part of yourself. Iran stared into the flames, the light reflecting in his eyes, deep, tired, but no longer empty. No, I'm not redeeming anything. I'm just trying to keep a promise I never fulfilled. To your son? To myself, he said. To the part of me I killed when I locked that gate. Rin said nothing more. He held his trembling hands near the fire, as if trying to capture what little warmth the world had left. After a while he asked, "Did you ever want to leave this place?" Iran was silent for a long time, then nodded. "I did. When my wife died, I almost left. But then winter came, and I stayed. They said it was loyalty. It wasn't. I just didn't know where else to go." "Do you believe in spring?" Rin asked, eyes fixed on the fire, watching the smoke rise like mist. "I've long forgotten the smell of spring," Iran said softly. "Here, there are only two seasons, the season of snow and the season of the dead." "Then, believe me," Rin said, his voice suddenly firm. "If I live through this, I'll tell your story. I'll say that in the frozen north, there was a gatekeeper who kept a dying man warm. And then, people will remember you not as a warden, but as a man." Iran froze. He looked at Rin, and in those eyes, he saw a kind of innocent faith he hadn't seen in years. "If I live," he said quietly, "I won't need anyone to remember. But if I die, let the name Iran stay here with the wind and the snow." Rin lowered his head. The fire blazed brighter, filling the small room with warmth. In that moment, the two of them bound to opposite sides of fate looked strangely alike, both exhausted, both alone, both yearning for the same thing they'd never known: peace. Outside, the 11th bell tolled heavy, slow. The wind shifted, blowing hard against the door, making the fire flicker. Iran looked up, his eyes reflecting the movement. "The time has come," he said. "Time for what?" Rin coughed. "The wind is changing," Iran said. "When the 12th bell rings, the gate will open for a moment. That's your only chance to escape. After that, the snow will seal everything." "What about you?" Rin asked softly. "I'll stay," Iran answered, voice low but steady. "If I leave, there'll be no one left to guard the gate. And the souls out there, they'll pour through. Maybe my fate is to stay here to keep watch so others can go free." Rin shook his head, tears falling, freezing as they hit the stone floor. "No, you deserve to live. You can still start over." Iran placed a trembling but firm hand on his shoulder. "You're the one who gets to start over, not me. I'm just the last gatekeeper of a dying winter." They sat in silence. The fire dimmed, leaving only a red glow on their faces. Iran stood, holding the keys. The light glinted off the metal like a distant star. "When the bell rings," he said, "go toward the wind. If you're lucky, you'll see the southern forest. Spring still lives there." Rin nodded, eyes red. Outside, the wind roared louder, chunks of snow slamming against the iron door like 1,000 desperate hands. Iran looked up and spoke softly, as if to the souls gathering in the storm. "Tonight, I keep my word." Then he turned to Rin, his gaze warm as the fire. "Come closer to the heat, boy. The night's long, but at least we still have the fire. I can't free you, but I can give you one warm night," he said hoarsely. The words hung in the frozen air, sounding at once like a confession and a prayer. Iran sat across from Rin, his cracked hands stretched toward the crackling fire. The flame's glow reflected across both their faces, casting a strange light in the wind-filled dark. Rin leaned closer to the hearth, the warmth reddening his cheeks. He smiled faintly, a small, trembling smile. "I never thought I'd see fire again," Rin said, his voice rough. "Here, fire is forbidden. It reminds people they're still alive." Iran stayed silent, his sunken eyes fixed on the glowing embers. "I used to fear fire too," he said slowly, "because fire reminded me of my son's eyes when he died. They were bright like this, so bright I couldn't bear to look." Rin said nothing. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks, cold and relentless. The small room seemed the only place in the entire fortress that still held a trace of life. After a long moment, Iran asked quietly, "Why were you imprisoned? Someone your age. You should have been anywhere but here." Rin gave a faint, tired smile. I didn't rebel against anyone. I just refused to kneel. The king ordered our village to send men to build his wall. We refused. They called that treason. Iran looked at him, and for a second, something like sorrow flickered in his eyes. I've arrested hundreds for the same reason, he said. And they all died for daring to say one word, no. Rin nodded, his eyes resting on Iran's trembling hands over the fire. And you? Have you ever said no? The question froze Iran. He stared at the boy for a long time before answering, voice dry as dust. No. I've said yes so many times that I've forgotten what my own voice sounds like. He let out a bitter, broken laugh. You know, people think loyalty is an honor, but sometimes loyalty is just a slower kind of death, one no one bothers to bury. Rin was silent. The firelight danced over Iran's face, highlighting the deep scar along his cheek, a mark carved by years under steel and frost. I don't think you're a loyal man, Rin said at last. A loyal man wouldn't be here, wouldn't light a fire, wouldn't save a prisoner. Iran lifted his head, his dull eyes flashing for a heartbeat, maybe with faith, or something like it. Maybe you're right, he said, but if there's nothing left to believe in, I'll believe in this small choice. Just one night, one fire, one person. Rin smiled weakly, but it was real. Sometimes one person is enough. Outside, the 11th bell rang. Iran rose slowly and walked toward the iron door. He placed his hand on the frozen surface, feeling the faint tremor from beyond the wind was changing. He turned back and said quietly, "The storm's almost over. When the final bell rings, the gate will open. You must leave then." Rin lifted his gaze, the firelight shining in his eyes. "And you?" "I'll hold the gate." "Why?" "Because someone has to close it after you're gone. And because I can't go out there, my feet belong to this snow now." Rin tried to speak, but Iran raised a hand. "Don't make me change my mind," he said. "My heart's weak enough already." The wind rose again, the fire flaring with it. Rin watched him for a long time, then whispered, "If I can, I'll come back. Not to save you, but to tell the world that even in the darkest prison, there was still someone who kept the light." Iran turned, smiling faintly. "If you live, forget me. Live a life that doesn't look back on this night." He stepped forward, placing a hand on Rin's shoulder. "Promise me." Rin nodded, tears shimmering in the firelight. "I promise." Outside, the 12th bell began to toll long, deep, echoing like the mountain's own breath. Iran drew the ring of keys, his hands shaking but steady. Each step he took toward the gate felt like walking between two worlds, one of eternal winter and one of fragile hope. When the great door groaned open, a rush of wind blasted through, snow swirling in white spirals. Iran leaned into the storm, shouting over the roar, "Go! Don't look back!" Rin looked at him one last time, then ran into the snow, his figure fading into the white sea. The wind screamed, the gate shrieked, and Iran stood there, hands gripping the bars, body trembling in the storm. He shouted, not in fear, but in release, "Go! Don't let this night return." The final bell faded into silence. Iran let go. The gate slammed shut, locking forever. In the empty room, only the wind remained and the faint breath of a dying fire. He sank to his knees, gazed at the last ember, and whispered, "This time, I kept my word." They sat facing each other, the fire crackling softly, its glow reflected on two faces, one old, one young, both weary of the world. Time seemed to stop inside that small room. Only the wind outside the gate and the faint scent of smoke slipping into their clothes remained. Iran was silent for a long time, his hands resting near the fire, but his eyes were distant, staring through the flames as if seeing another life long ago. Rin looked up, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Did you ever have someone waiting for you out there?" The question pierced the old warden's heart like a small needle. He drew a deep breath and answered softly, "I once did, but not anymore. They've all gone, either left or been buried beneath this snow." Rin watched him, his eyes bright in the firelight, holding no pity, only quiet understanding. "I have someone waiting too," he said. "My mother. Every year, when the first snow falls, she lights a lantern by the porch. She says as long as there's light, those who wander will find their way home. Aaron closed his eyes, as if listening to something far away. Maybe I once had a lantern like that too, he murmured, but I let it burn out. He poured a bit of warm water from the old kettle and handed it to Rin. The boy took it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep through his frozen skin. Thank you, he said, voice trembling. I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone do something for me without a reason. Nothing is without a reason, Aaron said. I only do this because I can't bear to hear another cry in the night. He looked at Rin for a long moment before continuing. My son said the same thing as you. On his last night, I was guarding the gate, and he called for me in that same voice. Tired, weak, but full of trust. I didn't answer. I sat there, thinking that doing my duty was enough. By morning, he was dead, and my duty meant nothing. He let out a dry, hollow laugh like metal scraping against metal. I think that was the last time anyone called me father. Rin set the cup down, his eyes never leaving the old man. Maybe tonight you'll hear it again, he said. Not from me, but from someone on the other side of the wind. Aaron looked toward the crack of the door, where snow drifted like pale souls. He nodded faintly, as if agreeing but not daring to believe. Sometimes, he said, I think the wind carries my son's voice. Every winter, when the direction changes, I hear him laugh again. Rin smiled gently. Maybe he never left. Maybe, Aaron said. But if that's true, he's laughing at me, the man who once swore to protect others, now needing a boy to remind him how to be human. They fell silent. The fire sank lower, its yellow glow deepening to red. Outside, the storm hadn't eased. The wind screamed around the walls, threatening to tear the fortress apart. The snow pounding the roof sounded like distant drums, each beat counting down to the end of the night. Rin, Aaron said quietly, I've kept this gate for 24 years. It opens for people to leave but never for them to return. Do you understand what I mean? You're afraid they'll come back? No, he shook his head. I'm afraid they won't, because if they don't, I'll no longer know who I'm guarding it for. Rin lifted his gaze. The fire's last light glowed across Aaron's worn face, tracing every deep line and weary mark. If I survive, Rin said slowly, I'll come back. Not to repay you, but so you'll know sometimes people do return. Aaron pressed his lips together, holding back emotion. You don't need to promise. Promises make people weak. But you're the one who believes in promises, Rin replied, his eyes steady. You said yourself you're keeping one still unfinished. Then, let me keep another, for you. Aaron let out a soft laugh, a small sound, but real. Aren't you afraid? Afraid I'll die, or betray you? Of course I'm afraid, Rin said. But if people can't trust anyone in this winter, then they've already been dead a long time. The words drifted into the frozen air, spreading like the last breath of a soul. Aaron looked into Rin's eyes and saw something he had once seen in leaves. A small, fragile flame that refused to go out. He nodded slowly. All right, he said quietly. Then I'll believe you. Tonight, I'll believe. Outside, the 12th bell tolled, its sound stretching long, carrying the listener's spirit away. The northern gate trembled, the wind surging like waves. Aaron rose, looked at Rin, and whispered, It's time. Rin nodded, stepping beside him. The two of them, one old, one young, stood together, staring into the world that had turned entirely white. Aaron gripped the ring of keys, his hand trembling. He turned to Rin, voice nearly a whisper. If I can't close the gate, promise me one thing. What is it? Light a lantern for me when spring comes. Rin didn't answer, he just took Aaron's hand, squeezed it gently, and nodded. And when the wind howled again, the dungeon door began to open, and the light of the blizzard poured in. In that moment, both of them knew. One would go, one would stay, but neither would ever be the same again. The prisoner spoke of his village where snow covered the rooftops, yet people still sang by the hearth. Rin's voice was faint, sometimes breaking from exhaustion, but every word carried a strange warmth. Aaron sat still, listening. In the dim firelight, he could almost hear distant strings, children's laughter echoing across a field of snow. Rin said, that in his village, people were never afraid of winter, because they believed every snowflake was the soul of a loved one returning, and when the snow grew thick enough, it meant they had finally reunited. "We don't call it winter," Rin said dreamily. "We call it the season of those who return." Iran lowered his head, his lips moving as he repeated the phrase to himself. "The season of those who return," he whispered. Then let out a soft laugh, but there was something broken inside it. "You know, I never believed anyone could return. When they're gone forever." Rin looked at him, not arguing, but with a calm empathy that made Iran feel suddenly ashamed. "Maybe it's because you've never looked up when it's snowing," Rin said. "If you lift your head long enough, you'll see that among the countless snowflakes, there's always one falling the wrong way, as if someone's trying to find their way home." Iran froze. For years he had watched the snow fall, but never like that. To him, snow had always been white ash, a curse. But as Rin spoke, he wanted to believe that maybe, in every white night, there was still one soul trying to return to him. The fire flickered, and their shadows stretched across the wall, two figures torn apart by time. Rin kept talking, his voice weakening, though his eyes still burned bright. "When I was a child, my mother told me that far to the north, there was a gatekeeper. He guarded the door between the living and the dead. If someone could make him smile, the gate would open, and their soul would be free." Iran let out a quiet chuckle. "An old tale. I've heard it before. They say the gatekeeper never smiles." "Because no one ever talks to him," Rin said. "They only fear him. No one ever asked why he stayed." Iran bowed his head slightly, his voice lowering. "And you think if someone did ask, he'd smile?" "No," Rin replied. "But maybe he'd stay quiet long enough to realize he still knows how to listen." Iran looked at him, and something flickered in his eyes. For a moment, he saw himself in that gatekeeper, a man who had stood for 20 years at a door no one wanted to cross, who had heard people die and the wind cry for their souls, until he forgot what a living voice sounded like. "I used to think I was the wall," Iran said softly. "But now I see I'm only its shadow." "And me," Rin said. "I just want to see the sun again." "The sun?" Iran smiled faintly. "Here, the sun is nothing but a fairy tale." "Then tell me about it," Rin said. "Tell me about the last time you saw it." Iran fell silent. A distant memory rose within him, back when he was young, a soldier standing on a white battlefield. After 3 days of blizzards, the clouds broke, and the sun appeared red as blood shining down on the frozen bodies of fallen men. He remembered it clearly, that feeling, the light blazing, beautiful, terrifying. "It was like this fire," he said, staring into the flickering glow. "Beautiful but cruel. It doesn't warm, it burns." "But it's still light," Rin whispered. "And maybe that's all the world needs, just a little light, even if it's small." Iran smiled, a real smile this time. "You speak like someone who hasn't learned how cruel the world can be." "Maybe," Rin said, "but if I die still believing in something that small, then I don't think I've lived in vain." Iran watched him for a long while. Part of him wanted to tell the boy he was naive, that there was no room for hope in this world. But another part, the part long buried inside him, stirred, warm again. "You talk too much," he said quietly. "Talking makes you forget the cold." Rin smiled. "Talking reminds me I'm still breathing." Iran shook his head, though something unfamiliar was rising in his chest. It had been so long since he'd heard a human voice in this dungeon, not begging, not cursing, just a voice that wanted to exist. Outside, the wind softened, leaving only the gentle sound of snow against the wooden door. The storm seemed to have passed. Rin leaned against the wall, eyes closing, his breathing steadying. Iran sat still, watching, his heart heavy. He knew the white night wasn't over, but for a fleeting moment, he felt peace. Perhaps this was the closest to life he'd come in 20 years. He pulled an old cloth from his coat, draped it over Rin's shoulders, and whispered, "Sleep now. Don't be afraid. I'll keep watch." Rin didn't answer, only smiled faintly in his dreams. The firelight touched his face, and Iran could almost see Leif, his son, sleeping in a springtime dream. He turned away, tears falling before he realized it. "Maybe," he whispered. "Tonight, I've seen the Sunday." Iran listened, his chest tightening as if hearing his own son's memories being spoken aloud. He stared into the fire. It crackled softly, whispering things he no longer dared to say. Outside, the wind still howled, but in that small room, silence no longer felt frightening. Every word Rin spoke was like a thin thread, stitching two lost souls together. Iran didn't know when it happened, but the boy's voice had become the only sound he wanted to hear. Once, he said quietly, I had a small house south of the fortress. That winter, the snow was so thick I had to dig a new path just to open the door. My wife was baking. My son sat by the fire eating and singing. The song was awful, but it made me laugh every time. When the war came, I had to leave. I told my son I'd return before the snow melted, but I never kept my word. Rin looked up, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. You did return, he said. It's just that the snow hasn't melted yet. The words made Iran's heart stop for a moment. He wanted to laugh, but his throat closed up. You say that so easily. To me, the snow never melts. It covers everything, my mistakes, my memories, the people I loved. Rin shook his head slightly. No. Snow only hides things for a while. When spring comes, everything shows again. Whether it's guilt or love, it all returns to the light. Iran said nothing. Spring. The word felt too distant for him. In the world of a gatekeeper, there was only winter, and when winter passed, others died in its place. But when he looked into Rin's eyes, he thought, maybe if spring exists, it must come from those who still dare to believe, even in their final breath. He stood, walked to the narrow window, and unlatched the wooden bar. A gust of wind rushed in, stirring the fire. Snow was still falling, white and endless. But beyond the storm, a faint glimmer shimmered far away, perhaps moonlight reflected on the snow. He stared for a long time, until he noticed his own shadow trembling in the wind. Do you see it? He whispered. Even when the light appears, it's only the reflection of the cold. Rin smiled softly. But at least it's still light. Iran turned to him. The boy sat there, eyes brighter than the flame itself, as if carrying his own lantern. Aren't you afraid to die? He asked. Of course, Rin said. But I'm more afraid of dying without leaving anything behind except silence. If my story isn't told, then my existence is no different from the wind passing through this place and vanishing. You want to be remembered? Iran asked. No, Rin said. I just want people to remember that someone once tried to live. Even in a dungeon, even in winter, someone refused to go dark. Iran sat down, bowing his head low. He thought of all the names in the guard's ledger, the ones who had cried, begged, cursed, but none had ever spoken like this. You make me ashamed, he said softly. I've lived too long without remembering what it means to try. Rin smiled faintly. But you're trying now. No, Iran said. I'm atoning. Atonement is also a way of living, Rin replied. As long as you don't stop halfway. Iran studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You speak like someone who's lived far longer than his years. Maybe because I don't have much time left to live like a normal person, Rin said. So I choose to live as if every minute were my last. The wind outside weakened, the snowfall thinning. The firelight reflected off the ceiling, tracing lines of light like moving water. Iran felt a calm settle over him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of wood, worn and carved with the image of a gate. This is all I have left. My son made it when he was little. He said if I ever got lost in the snow, I only had to hold this gate, and I'd find my way home. He handed the carving to Rin. Keep it. Maybe it'll bring you luck. Rin looked at him, startled. I can't accept. Take it. Iran interrupted. I have no home to return to, but maybe you'll find yours. Rin took the wooden piece and held it tightly in his palm. I'll carry it south, he said, and if I live, I'll carve another gate for you. Iran let out a soft laugh, trembling but warm. If I'm still here, I'll hear you knocking. Rin smiled. In that moment, within the frozen dungeon, they both forgot who they were, the prisoner and the warden. Forgot the war, forgot the white night pressing in. They were just two people, one trying to keep the fire alive, the other trying to find his way home. The fire kept burning, and for the first time in years, Iran wasn't afraid of the dawn. As dawn neared, Iran knew he had committed a crime, the crime of giving warmth to a traitor. The fire had nearly died, leaving only faint red embers like a dying breath. He sat there, eyes sunken, watching the sparks fall, each glowing briefly before fading, just like the way people died in this fortress silently, unseen. Rin was asleep, his breathing weak but steady, his soot-streaked face strangely peaceful. In that sleep, he looked like a child who had just escaped a nightmare. Iran pulled his old cloak tighter around the boy, then leaned his head against the wall. Outside, the wind had stopped screaming, replaced by a softer sound like melting snow. He thought he was imagining it, because in 20 years, not once had snow melted during a white night. But the steady dripping sound was real. Small, delicate, and yet it carried something he hadn't felt in so long. Hope. He rose and went to the narrow door, opening it just a crack. The white field outside was still blanketed in snow, but here and there, faint darker spots appeared where the wind had thinned the frost. A pale light stretched along the horizon. He couldn't tell if it was the moon setting or the sun beginning to rise. Iran felt his heart quicken. It had been so long since he'd felt this, not fear, but anticipation. He turned back to look at Rin, then at the torch. In just a few hours, the morning guards would arrive, and if they found the traces of fire, the open shackles, he would be executed before the day was done. Everything he'd built, his honor, his rank, his life, would be gone. And yet, strangely, the thought didn't frighten him. What he feared now was that Rin wouldn't make it out in time. He went to the guard's table, pulled out an old map of the fortress, and spread it open. The southern tunnel, half collapsed, but beneath it, there was a narrow path leading toward the mountainside. If the wind kept blowing this way, the boy could follow the draft to find the exit. South, he murmured. That's where your village is, isn't it? His voice was rough, but carried an unexpected warmth. He looked down at the small wooden carving he had given. Rin now clutched tightly in the boy's hand as he slept. Iron crouched beside him, brushing a finger over the smooth surface. The carving was uneven. Life had made it with a dull knife when he was only 8. "If you get lost, father," the boy had said once, "use this gate to find your way home." Iran drew a slow breath, then sat by the dying fire, staring at Rin's face in the dim light. "Leif," he whispered, "I'm about to do what I should have done long ago. Will you forgive me?" The wind slipped through the cracks in the door, sighing softly, almost like a reply. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat, and Rin's breathing, two sounds blending together like a faint song of life. When he opened them again, the first light of dawn had arrived, a thin red line cutting through the white snow. Dawn. The word stung like a blade drawn across his heart. In this fortress, dawn had never meant salvation. It only marked that another night had passed, and more souls had been buried under the ice. But today, that light felt different. It wasn't cold, it was pale and alive, like the breath of someone still holding on. Iran stepped toward Rin and gently shook his shoulder. "Wake up," he whispered. Rin stirred, eyes half open. "Is it morning?" "Not quite, but we don't have much time." The boy sat up, blinking, trying to understand. "You're going to help you leave." Iran cut in. "The southern tunnel's still narrow, but if you crawl, you'll make it. When you hear the first bell, go. Don't stop. Even if you hear me call, don't look back." Rin was silent. He knew those words were more than an order, they were a farewell. "You'll stay," Iran said. "I've guarded this gate all my life. No one else can take my place now." The boy looked at him, emotion trembling in his gaze. "You can still come with me. There's time." "No." Iran shook his head. "This gate and I are bound. One must leave, one must remain. If I go, it will never close again, and everything in this prison will no longer rest. The souls of the dead, they'll come back." "You wouldn't understand." Rin wanted to argue, but when he saw Iran's face, he only bowed his head. "If I live," he said softly, "I'll keep my promise. I'll light the lantern for you." Iran smiled. The dawn light touched his eyes, making them shimmer like mist. "That's all I need." Outside, the first bell rang. Iran stood, took the ring of keys, his hands trembling but steady. He looked at Rin one last time. "Go." Rin rose, clutching the wooden gate in his hand, and stepped toward the back door. The cold wind rushed in, scattering the last of the embers. He turned once, seeing Iran still standing there, his figure carved in pale light like a statue, lonely but steadfast. He wanted to speak, but his throat closed up. Iran nodded. Rin bowed slightly, then ran, his silhouette shrinking into the snow. When the door closed, Iran stood there for a long time. The light fell across his face, revealing every line and scar a map of memory. He spoke softly, to no one in particular, to the wind, the snow, and the spirit of his son. "I have committed many sins, but tonight I have kept one promise." Then he turned, walking toward the great gate, where the second bell was ringing in the distance to finish what only he could do, to guard the way for spring to pass through. But when he looked into the young man's eyes, he realized the crime was the only thing that still made him human. That awareness didn't strike like thunder. It came like a slow breath, seeping into the veins that had long gone cold. Iran sat there for a long time, silently watching the ashes in the hearth, feeling as though he himself were turning to dust. Guilt had been the chain binding him for 20 years, and now it became the proof that a heart still beat inside him. Without sin, there was no man. He once thought repentance meant praying, obeying the king, and burying his feelings beneath the frost. But tonight, he finally understood. Repentance was facing the part of oneself long forgotten. The light outside faded. Dawn was not yet clear, but the sky had begun to change. Strips of grey-white cloud rolled slowly, and the wind shifted south. Iran knew what it meant. Winter was ending, or at least, a part of it was thawing. Rin hadn't gone far. He knew that too. Even though he had told the boy not to return, what young man could abandon his saviour in the snow? He could feel it somewhere near the back gate. Rin was still there, watching through a crack in the wall. He didn't need to see him. He knew that gaze worried, torn, and alive. For the first time in years, Iran felt light. Not because he was forgiven, but because he finally understood that everything he'd done, even the wrong, could give birth to something right. He stood and walked down the great corridor, toward the northern gate where he had stood guard for half his life. The walls were covered in ice, and with each step, small cracks sounded underfoot like the sound of time breaking. Everything in the fortress felt tired, old, and waiting to collapse. When he reached the gate, Iran stopped. The massive iron doors were coated in frost, the locks thick as fists, frozen solid together. He placed his hand on the cold steel and closed his eyes. "How many years has it been?" he whispered. "Since I first closed you." In his mind, he heard it all again, his wife's sobs, his son's voice calling out, the howling wind, the toll of the white knight's bell. All of it blended into one song of guilt. "You've imprisoned so many," he murmured to the gate. "But did you know that I've been imprisoned with them all along?" No one answered. The wind rose, hurling snow against his face. He looked up to the top of the wall, where the fortress flag once flew, now only a torn scrap swaying limply. "King," he said to his own shadow, "do you know? You can cage 100 men, but you can't cage the conscience of one old gatekeeper." He gripped the ring of keys, the only thing shining in the pale dawn. His hand trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of truth. He knew that when the morning guards arrived, he would be arrested, sentenced, perhaps hanged in the square. But he did not regret it. Strange, after 20 years of obedience, he had never felt as free as he did now, in rebellion. In that moment, Iran saw Leif's figure appear through the mist, a 16-year-old boy with messy hair and bright eyes. The boy didn't speak. He simply smiled and pointed south, toward the wind. Iran nodded, tears spilling down his face. "I know, my son," he whispered. "I know what you want." He turned and walked back to the guardroom, where the ashes still glowed faintly. He took out an old ledger and flipped to the last page. Beneath the line that read, "Rin, White Knight," he added one trembling word, "alive." Then he closed the book and set it beside the hearth. His arm trembled, but his heart was calm. Outside, the wind shifted again, stronger now, carrying the storm farther away. He knew that when the blizzard turned, the boy would make it out. Everything within him grew quiet. He stepped into the courtyard, snow rising to his knees, head lifted toward the sky. The faint light along the horizon was now clearer, a thin red line cutting through the night. "Leaf," he whispered. "Do you see?" This year, dawn came early. A gust of wind swept past, carrying with it a soft laugh light as breath. Iran closed his eyes and smiled. He didn't know if it was real or not. He only knew he was no longer afraid of the wind. He turned once more, looking toward the small room where Rin had Saturday. The fire was out, but the ashes were still warm. "Guilt," he said softly. "You are the last proof that I ever lived. And if I must die to keep my promise, I'll die unbowed." In the distance, the horns of the soldiers echoed. Iran heard the grind of wheels on snow, the shouts of men opening the gates. He drew a deep breath and walked slowly toward the northern gate, the keys still in his hand, step by steady step. When the fortress guards arrived, they found the old gatekeeper standing there alone, his back straight as a banner pole. On his lips was a faint smile, and behind him the southern gate, leading to the woods, stood wide open. In the guard's ledger, his final line of writing was still wet with ink, and no one ever knew that in that winter, for the first time in the fortress's history, a prisoner had survived the white night. The wind rose again, the gate trembled, and the watch bell atop the tower rang, signalling the patrol. The sound of it made Iran's heart tighten. Each toll was like a blade, reminding him that reality was returning, that the white night was ending, and with it, his fate. He looked toward the corridor, where the first dim light of dawn was seeping through, cold and pale, like the breath of the dying. Iran turned back and saw Rin still standing near the wall, his eyes anxious. "They're here," Rin whispered. Iran nodded, his voice low but strangely calm. "Yes, and they must not see you." He stepped quickly toward Rin, gripping the boy's shoulders, his gaze stern but warm. "Listen to me. When the second bell rings, run. Don't look back, don't stop, don't hesitate. Even if you hear shouting, horses, swords, don't turn around." Rin opened his mouth to speak, but Iran raised a hand. "There's no time," he said. "They'll search every floor, every door. You must be gone before they reach the guard room. What about you?" "I'll stay. I'm the gatekeeper. They won't suspect me if I say I saw nothing." "But they'll kill you," Rin said, eyes glistening. Iran gave a rough laugh, the kind only someone long acquainted with death could make. "If I die, at least I'll die doing something that makes me feel alive." He went to the wooden cabinet and pulled out a second cloak, the uniform of a guard who died the year before. "Put this on. When you leave the fortress, follow the coal carts heading south. Cross the forest and you'll reach the frozen stream. After that, keep walking with the wind." Rin nodded, his hands trembling as he took the cloak. He put it on. It fit almost perfectly, as if fate had prepared it long ago. Iran looked at him one last time, his chest swelling with an emotion he couldn't name, pride and sorrow, tangled like a father watching his son march off to war. "Iran," Rin said, voice hoarse, "do you want me to tell someone? Tell the world out there?" Iran shook his head gently. "No need. I once wanted to be remembered, but now I only wish to be forgotten. Some people are meant to live in stories, and others are meant to rest between the blank pages." Rin said nothing. Outside, a horse neighed, and the clash of swords against armor echoed through the halls. Iran pulled Rin close to the wall, whispering, "The second bell is about to ring. When it does, go." He turned toward the door and took a deep breath. The scent of rust and cold smoke filled his lungs, so familiar it almost felt peaceful. In that moment he heard the wind shift, not howling anymore, but sighing. Iran closed his eyes and smiled. "Leif," he murmured, "you see now? I've done it." Then the second bell rang, echoing through the fortress. Iran shoved Rin toward the escape tunnel, shouting, "Go now." Rin darted into the darkness, his footsteps hurried but steady. Iran turned back, closed the hatch, and covered it with the false floorboards. When it was done, he sat down, the key ring still in his hand, as though nothing had happened. The main doors burst open, guards stormed in. "Iran, you're still here?" one shouted. "The white night's over, we have to check every prisoner." He rose slowly, nodding. "Yes, I was just about to do that." "Where's the rebel?" Iran looked straight at them, his voice dry and flat. Dead. Last night. I'll report it once I confirm the body. The soldier frowned, stepping closer. Where's the body? Iran pointed toward the tunnel. I covered it with snow. It's cold enough by morning's wind. It may already be buried. The guard nodded, unbothered. Fine. The king's orders are to haul all rebel corpses to the outer gate for burial. Get ready. Iran bowed his head, voice low. Understood. When they left, he stayed where he was, eyes fixed on the sliver of light spilling through the half-open door. The snow outside still swirled, but the wind had shifted, completely blowing south, toward the forest. He knew Rin was out there somewhere, running, breathing, alive. He sat down and opened the guard's ledger. Beneath the word, alive, he wrote another line, the ink shaky from his trembling hand. Free. He closed the book, laid it on the table, and pulled from his coat the remaining half of the wooden carving the gate symbol he'd kept all these years. He placed it gently on the cold ashes. A wisp of smoke rose, then faded into the air. Now, he whispered, I can rest. Because I know at least one has found his way home. The third bell rang. The guards returned, shouting, Iran, it's your turn to inspect the northern wing. He stood, walking out tall, silent. As the door closed behind him, the room was left with only ashes, the ledger, and 2 half-burned words still visible through the char. I forgive. Iran hurriedly pulled the prisoner to his feet, bound his hands, but instead of taking him back to the cell, he whispered, The way out is behind the old wall. His voice was hoarse, low, as if he feared even the air might overhear. Rin froze, unable to believe his ears. He looked at Iran, his eyes a mix of fear and hope. What are you saying? Iran didn't answer, only gestured for silence. He brought a finger to his lips, then pointed toward the moss-covered stone wall behind the hearth. Hurry! There's not much time. When the third bell rings, the patrol will change shifts, and I won't be able to hide you anymore. Rin stood motionless, still unable to comprehend that the gatekeeper, the man known as the most loyal in the fortress, was opening a way for a prisoner to escape. Why? Rin asked softly, his voice trembling with cold and emotion. Why are you helping me? You'll lose everything, even your life. Iran looked at him, his eyes like 2 streaks of ash still holding a dying ember. Because I once had a son like you, he said quietly, and I didn't keep my promise to him. Rin took a step back, feeling something tighten around his heart. You had a son? Once. Iran nodded. He was taken for a crime I never understood. I was the one who locked his cell, the one who guarded him on his final night. The next morning they dragged his body out cold as stone. I stood there, watching, and couldn't even cry. His voice broke. Since then, I stopped believing in law, in kings, or in anything except the sound of the wind at night. Every night it calls me, asking why I'm still alive. He paused, eyes meeting Rin's. But you won't die tonight. I won't let anyone die like he did again. Rin bit his lip, tears spilling down his face. I don't know what to say, sir. Don't say anything. Iran cut him off. Just go. He stepped forward, pulled aside a tattered rug on the floor, revealing an old, cracked stone slab. Taking a small knife from his belt, he wedged it into the crack. The stone groaned softly, moss crumbled away, and a rush of cold air seeped out from the darkness beyond. A narrow tunnel appeared so tight only one person could crawl through. Rin stared into it, breathing hard. You have to go now, Iran said. This path leads to the southern slope. If you reach it, you'll find a frozen stream. Follow it, you'll reach the forest. From there, 2 days' walk, and you'll be home. You know the way to my village? I've been there, Iran said. Winter, long ago, when I was younger than you are now. Back then, I still knew how to sing, how to smile. You can tell someone that the gatekeeper still remembers the road to the south. Rin bowed his head, his voice shaking. I can't leave you here. Iran laid a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. If I go, who will guard the gate? This door needs someone to stand behind it. And I've guarded it all my life. I'm just guarding it differently now. Rin's eyes glistened with tears. I won't forget you. Don't remember, Iran said softly. Just live. That's enough. The second bell rang, long and deep, shaking the whole fortress. Iran pushed Rin toward the tunnel. Go, quickly. Rin bowed low, then knelt, his hands still bound. Iran hurriedly drew his knife and cut the ropes. From now on, you're free, he said, his voice like a blessing. Rin clenched his fists, then crawled into the tunnel. Before vanishing into the darkness, he turned back and whispered, If there's another life, I'll find you again. Iran stood still, saying nothing, only watching until Rin's shadow disappeared. He pulled the rug back over the opening, brushing dust across the seams. When he was done, he sat down in his chair, his eyes empty but strangely peaceful. Outside, the wind shifted south. He knew what that meant. The boy was out. A strange chill ran down his spine, not from the cold but from a quiet sense of release. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't hear the wind accusing him, didn't see Leaf's face in the fire, only silence, soft and kind. Iran closed his eyes, leaning back against the wall, his lips moving faintly. I kept my promise, my son. The third bell rang, echoing through the fortress. The great northern gate burst open. Guards flooded in, their voices sharp. Where's the rebel prisoner? Iran, report. He opened his eyes, calm. Dead, he said. The White Knight took him. They rushed off to verify, never suspecting. When the doors closed again, Iran looked down at his dirt-stained hands and smiled faintly. Maybe for the first time, I'm not guarding a prison anymore, but freedom. Outside, the snow still fell, but the light along the horizon had grown warmer, tinted faintly gold, like the promise of another season. Somewhere, deep in the southern woods, a young man was running, carrying a small wooden carving of a gate and the warmth of a promise made on a white night. The prisoner trembled, unable to believe it. Why? The question escaped like the final breath of someone who had lived too long in despair. Iran didn't answer right away. He stood there, framed by the flickering torchlight, his aged figure firm and unmoving like the last remnant of an ancient wall. In that moment, the firelight caught his face, and the deep lines carved by time became the markings of a lifetime spent in silence. Because I once had a son like you, he finally said, his voice low and rough, like wind sweeping across stone, and I didn't keep my promise to him. Rin froze, his lips parting, but no words came. He looked into Iran's eyes, where the trembling light flickered as though a whole sky had gone dark behind them. Iran didn't look back. He simply bent down, checking the ropes around Rin's wrists, tightening them slightly. I couldn't save him, Iran continued, because back then I still believed in law, in orders, in something called a soldier's honor. I thought doing what was right was enough to be at peace. But when I saw my son die in a cell, I understood sometimes following what's right is just another way of killing yourself. Rin inhaled sharply, his throat tight, unsure if it was from emotion or cold. The old man before him, the one everyone called the king's loyal hound, was now speaking with the voice of a father, a man who had lost everything but still wanted to leave something behind in this world. Rin began, but Iran raised a hand. Don't speak, just listen. Listen as if it's the last wish of someone already dead. He looked straight into Rin's eyes, faded with age, yet burning fiercely as he spoke those words. When you get out of here, don't say my name. Don't tell anyone I helped you. Let them think you escaped on your own, that the snow hid your tracks. You can hate me, you can forget me, but don't let anyone remember. Because sometimes, for a promise to survive, the one who made it must die with it. Rin stood frozen, then slowly bowed his head. You don't have to die, he said, voice trembling. If I make it, I'll come back. No, Iran snapped, his voice like rusted iron striking stone. Don't come back. If you do, everything I've done will mean nothing. They'll catch us both, and then nothing will be saved. Go. Don't look back. Turning around means I die for nothing. He paused, then his voice softened to a whisper. Leaf, my son, once promised to come back too, but he never got the chance. Rin looked at him, realizing that in this moment, Iran was no longer speaking to him, but to a ghost only he could see. When I heard someone knocking at the gate that night, Aran went on, I knew it was him, but I didn't open it. I thought keeping the gate closed was the right thing to do. The next morning, when I opened it, he had turned to stone. His voice broke, then silence fell. Only the wind's whistle and the crackle of the torch filled the air. Rin stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not guarding anyone anymore, Aran, he said quietly. You've opened the gate, at least in your heart. The old man smiled faintly, a sad but peaceful smile. Maybe so, but the real gate still needs someone to stand by it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small object, a wooden carving of a rising Sunday. My son made this for me, when he was alive. He said that if I carried it, I wouldn't lose my way when the world turned white. Now it's yours. If you ever see the light, remember it came from those who were left behind. Rin took the carving, his heart heavy. I'll keep it, he said. And I'll tell this story, not your name, but the story of a gatekeeper who kept his promise through the white night. You don't need to tell it, Aran replied. You just need to live. As long as one person lives, the promise does too. They stood there for a long time, gazing at each other in the dying firelight. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the prison roof in layers thick as mourning cloth. The second bell had stopped, replaced by the distant sound of hooves. Aran sighed. It's time. He pulled Rin close and loosely tied the rope around his wrists again, but this time, one tug would set it free. When they ask, I'll say you died in the night. You must leave right after they go. Understand? Rin nodded, eyes wet. I understand. Aran looked at him for a long moment, then suddenly lifted his hand and placed his palm on Rin's forehead, like a father blessing a son before he leaves home. Go, he whispered, and don't let the snow catch you. Rin bowed deeply, then turned to leave. The sound of the stone hatch opening echoed softly, cold and hollow. When Rin disappeared, Aran stayed where he was, staring into the darkness. He knew he would never see the boy again. But inside, he felt lighter, as if the long night had finally passed and the light was seeping into the cracks of the old fortress. He turned back, walked to his guard's chair, and sat down. Outside, the wind rose again, but this time, in its song, he heard something different. The fading sound of footsteps, growing softer, merging with the snow, carrying away the warmth of a promise kept through the white night. Rin slipped through the stone tunnel, his body fading into the darkness. The sound of heavy breathing echoed along the narrow passage, where the damp stone ceiling dripped cold water down his collar. Aran stood at the mouth of the tunnel, watching until the torchlight in Rin's hand vanished completely. He didn't close the hatch right away. Instead, he bent down and placed his hand gently on the cold edge of the stone, like a final farewell. Go, he whispered. Don't look back, even if I call. Then he slowly pushed the old plank back into place, covering it with dust and the worn rug as if no one had ever touched it. The room sank back into silence. The fire in the hearth was nothing but a faint, dying glow. Aran sat down in his chair, his trembling hands resting on his knees, as though all the strength he had left had gone with Rin into that darkness. The sounds of the fortress remained the same. The wind howling through the walls, the faint ringing of the iron bells on the tower. But for the first time, they didn't frighten him. In that vast cold, Aran felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading inside him. He looked toward the door. The snow was still falling, but something in that white haze had changed. The wind no longer screamed like a blade, it sighed, like the breath of someone freed from chains. He knew Rin had made it out. The instincts of a man who'd guarded prisoners too long told him exactly how long it would take to crawl through that narrow path. By now, Rin must be emerging from the southern exit, where the air was colder but open, where the sky was beginning to brighten. My son, he whispered, I've done what I didn't dare to do before. Aran leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he was 20 years younger again, the day the first snow blanketed the fortress. Leif, his son, was still smiling then. The boy loved to catch snowflakes, shaping them into little birds before letting them fly. If they had wings, father, he once said, they'd fly to the Sunday. Now Aran could almost hear that voice again, but it no longer hurt. It sounded like forgiveness. Outside, the wind shifted. It didn't blow north anymore toward the cold and death, but south, gentle as a hand guiding him onward. He chuckled, the sound rough but calm. I understand now, Leif. You told me to open the gate, and I did. Tonight, the gatekeeper holds no one anymore. He rose, his legs heavy but steady. He took the guard's ledger and placed it on the table. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen, writing slowly, carefully. Rin, alive. He stared at the words for a long time, as if engraving them into his mind. The ink hadn't yet dried when he added another word, smaller but brighter. Free. When he finished, he closed the book and laid it beside the ring of keys, the symbol of a lifetime spent in confinement. 20 years, he murmured, and I never knew what that word looked like. The light dimmed, leaving only faint sparks dancing in the ashes. He stood and walked to the great northern gate, pressing his palm against the icy steel. From now on, I won't open you to lock anyone in, he said to the gate, but to let myself out. He didn't mean to flee. He knew the guards would come, would question him, might even kill him. But he wasn't afraid. Sometimes, freedom isn't about surviving, it's about knowing you've chosen right. He turned back to his seat and listened to the wind whispering through the cracks of the door. A faint sound followed the soft vibration of the stone hatch below. He didn't turn, only smiled. He knew it wasn't Rin returning, it was the wind passing through the tunnel, singing in the voice of release. He whispered, "Don't be afraid, my son. The gate is open now." Everything slowed. Time, breath, even the distant bells seemed to dissolve into the snow. He felt his heart lighten, as though the weight in his chest was melting away, drifting south with the wind. Somewhere out there, Rin was seeing the forest by now. Maybe he was stumbling, maybe crawling, maybe laughing. As long as he was breathing, that was enough. Eran tilted his head, resting against the wall. His eyes closed, not from weariness, but from peace. A single drop of water fell from the ceiling, landing in his open palm, melting there like a sign that the snow was beginning to thaw. He smiled. "Spring," he whispered. "Maybe it's coming." And then, through the final gust of wind slipping through the door, Eran heard a faint sound like footsteps on snow, fading into the distance. He didn't know if it was real or just the wind, but for that one moment, he felt as though someone was carrying a piece of his soul, walking onward along the path he could no longer take. The soldiers came to inspect, their hurried footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. Each thud sounded like a heartbeat pounding in Eran's chest, but he didn't move. The torchlight from the hall spilled weakly into the room, casting a dim glow across his aged face, calm, without fear. The iron door swung open, and 2 soldiers burst in, the smell of snow and gunpowder sweeping through with the wind. "Iran, there's been a report of noise in the northern cell block. Where's prisoner number 27? One of them barked, voice sharp as he swept his torch across the room. Iran lifted his head slowly, his voice gravelly and heavy, as if pulled up from the depths of stone. "Dead. Dead?" The soldier frowned. "How?" "Last night." "The cold took him," Iran answered, not blinking. He lied with the tone of a man who had spent a lifetime telling the truth, and so no one noticed. The second soldier stepped closer, glancing around. "Where's the body?" "I dragged it into the pit to be buried with the other rebels in the morning," Iran said, gesturing toward the back of the room. The wind strong, the snow covered everything. "You won't find much now." The soldier eyed him for a moment, suspicion flickering, then nodded. "Fine. There's an order from the tower every northern cell must be cleared before sunset. No prisoners left alive." With that, he turned and left, leaving behind a younger soldier who lingered by the doorway. The young man looked uneasy. "I heard he was a rebel," he said quietly. "But was he really? Or just a deserter?" Iran looked at him, the torchlight reflected deep in his eyes. "You're young," he said softly. "Don't believe everything they write in the records. Here, everyone's a rebel, the only difference is what they rebel for." The young soldier fell silent, his gaze wavering. "Aren't you afraid?" he finally asked. "Afraid?" Aran repeated, then smiled faintly. "Fear's the only thing that's kept me awake all these years. But not anymore. Now I only feel the cold and peace." The young man bowed his head. Perhaps he sensed something in Iran's voice, something that those who hadn't lived too long in the dark could never quite understand. "All right," he murmured. "I'll report him dead." "Thank you," Iran said simply, watching as the young soldier turned and left. When the footsteps faded away, he exhaled, his breath turning into a thin mist in the cold air. He stood and walked to the door, peering down the long hallway. At the far end, the faint light of the first morning after the white night streamed in dim but real. Outside, the snow was still falling, but gently now, each flake drifting down like a farewell. He turned back, his gaze sweeping over the room. The guard's desk, the hearth, the ring of keys, the ledger, and the faint footprints on the floor leading to the rug. Everything was strangely peaceful. No groans, no clanking chains, no breath but his own. The whole fortress seemed to hold its breath, as if bearing witness to this single moment. "He made it," he murmured, confirming it to himself. "And I'm still here to say it." Iran walked to the table, picked up the ledger once more. Inside, the line "Rin, alive" was still wet, the ink slightly blurred by the damp air. He touched it with his finger, then gently closed the book. A drop of water fell from the ceiling, landing on the cover, spreading like a tear. Iran watched it, then smiled faintly. "Seems the sky's crying for me now." He sat down and drew from his coat a small ring, the only thing he'd kept since his wife's death. Inside were 2 worn words: "Keep promise." He turned it between his fingers, the torchlight glinting off it, leaving a soft gold shimmer on the wall. "I kept it, Myra," he said quietly. "This time, I didn't break it." Outside, a trumpet sounded the signal for morning inspection. Iran sighed, stood, straightened his coat, and gripped the ring of keys tightly in his hand. Everything was done. Everything was right. He knew he couldn't escape his end, but he no longer needed to. As he stepped out of the room, the pale morning light washed over his face, illuminating every line, every scar, turning them into something gentle, almost sacred. He paused at the doorway, looking south, where the wind was blowing. Then he spoke softly, as if to the snow. "If anyone asks, tell them the gatekeeper still stands here. But not to guard anymore, only to wait for the dawn." They suspected him, but because of his long-standing reputation, they let it go and left. When the last footsteps faded into the corridor, Iran finally exhaled, the cold air from his lungs drifting out like thin smoke. The faint light from the torch outside brushed across his worn face, revealing a calm expression and eyes as deep and still as frozen lakes. He stood there for a long time, listening to the snow striking the door, the wind curling around the stone tower like distant whispers. That silence was no longer frightening. It felt like the silence of a man who had finished his life with no debts left to pay. He returned to the guard's desk, his hand gliding over the cracked wooden surface faded by years, where ink still clung to old entries. Dates, prisoner numbers, verdicts, deaths. Each line was a name, a life that had once passed through the gate he had watched. And now, beneath all those careful records, there was one small, simple line, so small someone might overlook it. "Rin, alive." He looked at that line and smiled faintly. "Strange," he murmured to himself. 20 years, and not one name ever carried the word alive. From his pocket, he drew out the remaining half of the wooden charm Leaf had carved long ago, its blade marks worn smooth by time. He placed it on the desk, facing the ledger. "One half stays, one half goes," he whispered, "just like me and him." The room grew colder, but his heart felt warm. The light outside shifted, dimmed, the sky turned to a pale silver grey, a sign the storm was circling back. The wind rose, sharper now, sending snowflakes spinning around the frozen window frames. Iran looked up, his eyes fixed through the narrow slit of the window. The courtyard below was covered in white, but amid the blank expanse, he noticed a dark streak, faint, but clear enough. Footprints. He knew instantly they were Rin's. The boy had gone far, but not far enough for the wind to erase his tracks. "Go," Iran rasped under his breath. "Faster. Don't let them find you." He reached for the ring of keys and stepped toward the door. Along the corridor he walked slowly, his boots echoing dully against the cold stone floor. Each step felt like another second of freedom passing. When he reached the staircase leading to the tower, he stopped. From there, he could see the courtyard soldiers below were gathering the bodies of those who'd frozen to death during the night. Grey shrouds draped over wooden stretchers, lined up in rows toward the gate. Once, that sight had left him unmoved, but today, it looked like a painting cracked by time. He could see, beneath those shrouds, the shapes of people who had once laughed, cried, begged him to open the gate. Now, only the snow was left to see them off. "Perhaps," he said softly, "every prison needs one soul to leave, so the others can rest." He turned and climbed to the top of the tower. The wind there was fierce enough to knock down a weaker man, but Aran climbed, steady and sure. When he reached the top, he opened the round hatch leading outside. The wind hit his face, forcing his eyes shut. The fortress stretched out below, vast, white and silent, like a graveyard of time itself. He looked southward, nothing but mist, but in his mind, it was the direction of freedom. "If there's anything left I still believe in," he whispered, "it's that direction." From his pocket, he took the ring engraved with the words, "Keep promise," and raised it to eye level. "Myra," he murmured, "I kept it." The wind surged, as if in reply. He tightened his fist around the ring, then placed it on the ice-covered stone railing, letting the wind take it. Below, a small group of soldiers was marching toward the northern post, their cloaks whipping in the wind, helmets glinting faintly under the dim light. Iran knew that when they arrived, they'd question him. Maybe they'd find the tunnel. Maybe they wouldn't. But it didn't matter anymore. He only wanted a few more quiet minutes to remember his son's laughter, the prisoner's breath, to remember that even in the coldest night, something warmer than fire still existed. He left the tower and returned to his guard room. When he entered, he sat back down, resting his hand on the ledger. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside, everything had stopped. He no longer heard the bells, no longer felt the cold sinking into his bones. Only one thing was clear, the stillness, absolute and pure, like the final breath of a soul released. Before closing the ledger, he added one last trembling line. "Not all gates are locked to keep people in. Some are kept, so someone else might find the way out." Then he set the pen down, eyes fixed toward the south. In that moment, he was no longer a jailer, no longer a traitor. He was the one who opened the path to life. Iran wrote in the guard's ledger, "Rin, alive." He wrote slowly, each trembling stroke deliberate, as if afraid that even the slightest slip could steal the meaning from the words. The ink bled into the old paper, seeping into the wood grain of the desk, blending with the last bit of warmth left in the writer's hands. He sat there, staring at that line as if it were the only light left in his life. 2 simple words, yet within them lay everything: atonement, forgiveness, and freedom. He had written hundreds of names in that ledger, and everyone ended with the word dead. But this time, it was different. One word, and it opened a door. "Alive," he whispered, smiling faintly. "Maybe that's the prayer I never knew I was searching for." The wind rose, making the pages of the ledger tremble. The brittle, yellowed sheets turned on their own, revealing memories he had long wished to forget. There were names whose faces he no longer remembered, but whose voices still echoed. Some had died in silence. Others had screamed for their mothers until their last breath. And now, among all those memories, one had lived, and that was enough to bring peace to Iran's heart. He gently closed the ledger and set the heavy ring of keys on top. The metal clinked together with a dry, hollow sound, once the sound of chains and command, but now it rang like a small bell marking the end of a lifetime of confinement. From his coat, he took an old cloth and began wiping the keys, one by one. Each opened a different door: the interrogation room, the isolation cell, the northern gate. They had once been his power, symbols of order and fear. Now, shining faintly under the firelight, they only looked heavy. He held them all in his palm, staring for a long time, then whispered, "You're tired too, aren't you? Today, I'm giving you rest." He opened a drawer, took out a small fabric pouch, placed the keys inside, and tied it shut with a worn leather cord. Then he stood, walked to the cold hearth, knelt down, and set the pouch in the ashes. "Enough," he murmured. "Every door is open now. The ashes swirled, dusting his hands, but he didn't pull away. That faint warmth made him feel alive, as if touching something human again. He stood and went to the narrow window overlooking the courtyard. The snow was still falling, the flakes large and soft as white petals. In the distance, along the southern wall, he saw a line of crows perched silently, staring toward the far forest. Aaron nodded slightly. "Good," he said to the wind. "Carry him there, and if he falls, show him the way to spring." He turned back to the desk and opened the last drawer. Inside was an old map, the fortress as it had been before the ice took it. Every passage, every tunnel, every boundary, all drawn by his own hand. A corner in the south was crossed out. The faded note beside it read, "Old escape route, unsafe." Iran took a piece of charcoal, crossed out the warning, and wrote above it, "Path of life." When he finished, he placed the map atop the ledger, 2 witnesses to the final promise of his life. The room was bathed in the dim light of the morning after the storm. The wind had quieted, only the snow still fell. Gently now, no longer fierce. Iran felt the air itself breathing, as though the fortress too was being freed with him. He sat down slowly, reached into his chest pocket, and drew out the carved wooden charm of the gate, the other half of the piece Rin carried. He studied it for a long time, his fingers tracing the rough, uneven lines. "Leif," he whispered, "I've done it. Your gate, it's no longer closed." He pressed a kiss to the wood, then placed it between the open pages of the ledger. From far away, a bell began to toll again, but this time, it wasn't for a changing shift. It was the bell of a new morning. Iran heard the clatter of metal in the hall, then a voice calling out, "Gatekeeper, orders from command." He didn't move. He sat still, eyes fixed on the thin line of light from the south. The pale glow cut through the snow and touched the ledger, making the word alive shimmer as if the ink was still wet. He exhaled softly, his breath barely more than a sigh. "I'm here," he said, so quietly only he could hear it. He closed his eyes, smiling, and in that moment, time seemed to slow. Everything around him faded, the footsteps, the wind, even the distant bells, until all of it drifted far beyond reach. And within that perfect silence, he heard another sound. Leif's laughter, faint and distant, mingling with the falling snow. Iran smiled one last time, the light reflecting on his peaceful face, as if the gatekeeper had finally found the door that led him home. He knew he would be discovered, but he wasn't afraid anymore. That calmness didn't come from courage. It came from being too tired to fear. For 20 years, Iran had lived the same unchanging days, guarding doors, counting hours, listening to the cries of the forgotten. He had seen countless deaths, yet never once a life bright enough to make him believe the world was still warm. But now it was different. Just knowing that Rin was alive, just knowing that someone had escaped these frozen walls, was enough. He sat in silence, listening to the wind slip through the iron frame. The wind had changed. It no longer carried the chill of death, but a rhythm slow, steady, deep, like the breathing of someone alive beyond the fortress. "He's far now," Iran whispered. "By now, he's probably past the snow valley." He imagined Rin, the young prisoner with bright eyes, walking through rows of white trees, his breath turning to mist, his hand still clutching the carved wooden charm of the gate. The thought blurred Aaron's eyes not with sadness, but with pride. "I did it, Leif," he said softly. "Do you see?" Your father opened the gate. The room around him was still. From the ceiling, droplets of water fell onto the floor, creating a slow rhythm like the ticking of a clock. He looked around. Everything seemed to be changing, or rather, melting. The thin layer of frost on the window frame began to crack, and the dim morning light seeped in like a golden thread weaving through mist. Aaron stood and walked toward the light. Each step was a memory cries, please, the clash of blades on stone all fading like shadows behind him. He stopped before the small window, looking out. The world outside was still white, but in a different way, not the white of despair, but the white of beginnings. He placed his hand against the cold stone wall, closed his eyes, and let the chill sink into his palm. "Now I understand," he said. "Freedom isn't opening the door for yourself, it's letting someone else walk through it." The bell from the tower rang out, its echo long and low. This time, it didn't make him flinch. It sounded like a farewell. He turned back to the table, picking up the guard's ledger and the carved piece of wood, the only two things left of his life. He opened the book, looked at the line where the ink had dried, Rin, alive, then placed the wooden charm across the page. In the dim light, the two objects merged into one strange symbol, a testament to the choice of a man who had once been a keeper of locks. The wind outside shifted again, blowing northward, slipping through the cracks in the door and turning the page of the ledger. Iran let out a quiet laugh. "Back again, are you? That's all right. I won't hold you." He sat down, leaning his back against the wall. The room blurred around him, veiled in misty air, but he didn't feel cold. Instead, a strange warmth spread through him, from his hands to his heart. It reminded him of the years long gone when he was young, holding Leif in his arms, telling him stories of gatekeepers who never left their posts. "They stayed," he whispered, "not because they were afraid, but because some doors can only be opened from the inside." Footsteps echoed down the corridor, heavy and hurried. The soldiers were back. Iran could hear the commander shouting, the clang of metal, the wind carrying the smell of gunpowder and leather. He knew they were coming, but he didn't move. He closed his eyes, letting his body relax. In that moment, he no longer felt like a prisoner or a condemned man. He was simply Iran, the gatekeeper, who had finished his last duty. The iron door clanged open, torchlight flooding the room, but he didn't open his eyes. Someone shouted, "He's still here! Open all cells, check the tunnels!" Then came the rush of boots, voices calling out to each other. Another voice shouted, "No one in the tunnel, nothing but snow." A silence followed, long and heavy. Then someone whispered, "Maybe he really escaped." "No," a deeper voice replied. "If the gatekeeper said he's dead, then he's dead." They left, the door closing behind them. The faint light that remained fell across Iran's face, where the smile still lingered. He didn't open his eyes, just listened to the wind outside it. No longer howled, but whispered. And within that whisper, he heard two words, faint and distant. "Thank you." Iran smiled, a single tear slipping down his cheek, landing in his palm. "No," he murmured, "I should be the one thanking you." Then he leaned back against the wall, letting his final breath blend with the wind, soft as a blessing for the one crossing through the southern forest. The snowstorm slowly faded, and a warm dawn crept over the fortress towers like golden honey spilling gently over an old, merciless world. The first light in many days shone through the cracks in the walls, reflecting off the ice, turning what was once a symbol of cold and confinement into a quiet, almost sacred scene. In the courtyard, soldiers were cleaning up, the sound of shovels striking stone sharp and weary. The smell of smoke from the watchman's kitchen mixed with the cold scent of iron from the great gate, giving the morning air a faint sense of life, as if the entire fortress had just awakened from a long winter sleep. Iran still sat there, silent in his small guardroom, the light slipping through the window and falling across his face, soft as candlelight. The faint smile at the corner of his lips remained, his eyes closed in peace, no trace of fear left in the lines of his face. To those who entered, the sight made them stop. The old gatekeeper, sitting motionless as if asleep, before him an open ledger with the final words, "Rin, alive." No one knew who that name belonged to, only that the shaky yet firm handwriting looked like a period written with the last breath of a lifetime. A young soldier bent down, about to shake him awake, but when his hand touched the man's shoulder, the coldness of Iran's body made him freeze. The commander stepped forward, studying him for a long moment before saying quietly, "Don't touch him. He's gone." The room fell silent. Only the wind whispered through the cracks of the door, carrying a few last snowflakes that drifted in and melted on the damp stone floor. Another man picked up the ledger, reading the final line, frowning slightly. "Rin, who is that?" The commander didn't answer right away. He looked toward the window, where the morning light poured in, washing the old man's face in a warm haze. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "someone he owed a promise to." Then he turned and gave his order. "No one is to move him. Let him sit like this. A gatekeeper deserves to guard his gate to the very end." The order spread, and from that day on, No one dared to disturb the wooden chair where Aaron sat today. They only placed a small oil lamp beside him, even though daylight now filled the room. Some said it was so he wouldn't have to walk through the darkness alone. Outside, the sun climbed higher, its light spilling across the courtyard, melting the last of the snow. The frozen river in the distance began to crack, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the silence, like the first breath of spring. The young soldiers, men who had only ever known snow and frost, watched the steam rise from the thawing ground, too moved to speak. On the watchtower, the fortress flag fluttered in the warm wind for the first time in months, no longer stiff with ice. Crows circled above the gate, cawing in their raspy voices, but the sound no longer felt ominous. Everything was changing, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Only the wind bore witness. It swept through the doorways, down the stone corridors, brushed across Aaron's stiffened hand, and slipped out through the northern gate, carrying something light as a breath, perhaps the soul of the gatekeeper, or the final fragment of a promise kept. The young soldier still stood in the guardroom, his eyes fixed on the ledger. He didn't fully understand, but he felt something sacred in that single word, alive. He wrapped the book carefully in a piece of cloth, placed it in the wooden drawer, and spoke softly, as if to the departed man, "I'll keep it for you." When he turned to leave, he looked back one last time at the old man's face bathed in morning light. For a moment, he thought he saw Aaron's eyes open, gazing out the window toward where the sunlight was melting the snow. But when he blinked, there was only the silent figure, still as stone in the glow of dawn. Far in the south, the forest was still veiled in mist, but now the mist was beginning to lift. A narrow path appeared among the trees, winding and uncertain, leading toward a place no one in the fortress had ever dared to go. And if one listened closely, beneath the whisper of the first spring wind, there seemed to be the sound of distant footsteps, slow, steady, echoing from that direction. No one knew if it was real or only imagined. But as the wind carried the sound closer, it became clear as if someone was still walking, carrying the faith of the man who had once opened the gate, stepping out of the last winter. He thought he saw his son's silhouette smiling, standing at the gate, nodding at him. At first, it was only a faint glow in the mist, but slowly it grew clearer, as if carved straight from memory. Iran saw Leif, still wearing the old wool sweater his wife had knitted, holding a small key that glimmered like a shard of the Sunday. "Father," Leif's voice drifted through the air, soft as wind. "You've opened it!" Iran tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Only his breath escaped, dissolving into the air like smoke. His son smiled, stepping closer, though every step seemed to blend into the light, never touching the ground. The sight was too real to be a dream, and too gentle to be real. He wasn't afraid, he only felt his heart fill with a peace he'd never known. All the pain, the guilt, the sleepless nights haunted by ghosts, melted away like snow beneath sunlight. Leif stood at the fortress gate, where the morning light pierced through a thin veil of fog. Behind him stretched a white horizon, no longer blinding, but clear as water. Iran gazed in silence, not daring to blink, afraid the image would vanish. "How long have you been waiting for me?" he whispered. "Since the first snow fell, father," the boy's voice echoed, warm as spring. "But I'm not waiting anymore. The gate is open for me, for Rin, and for you." Iran bowed his head, his hand trembling as he clenched the empty air, trying to hold on to that fleeting moment. "I was wrong, Leif," he rasped. "That day, I couldn't open the gate for you. I thought loyalty was duty, that guarding the gate meant living. But now I see, I was only locking the world away." Leif took another step, the same soft smile on his lips as always. "No one can hold the sun, father," he said. "But we can learn to let the light pass through our hands." Aaron listened, and the corners of his mouth curved into a faint smile. Time seemed to stop. Everything around him dissolved into a gentle golden light that wrapped around the entire fortress. The cold stones now reflected warmth. The cracks in the walls looked like threads leading to freedom. He chuckled softly. "Now I understand, Leif. Keeping the gate was never about holding people back, it was about protecting what's worth saving. And once that's safe, the gate can open." The boy nodded. The light around him spread, flooding the corridor, shining on the open ledger. The words, "Rin, alive," gleamed as though etched in gold. "Will you come to where I'm standing, father?" Leif asked, his voice as soft as breath. Iran looked toward the gate. The wind had stopped, leaving only the faint sound of melting ice. "No," he said. "Not yet. There's still something I must do." The boy tilted his head, his eyes carrying a flicker of sadness but no blame. "You won't stay much longer," he said. "But before you go, you must see something no one else has ever seen." "What is it?" "The light inside the snow." Leif raised his hand, pointing toward the gate. Outside, snowflakes drifted quietly under the sunlight, and within each tiny crystal, Iran saw a pale golden hue, the color of fire, the color of life. They were no longer cold ashes, but droplets of pure light falling to the ground, melting into vapor, then disappearing like souls finally set free. "Do you see it, father?" Leif asked. "Winter isn't the end. It only keeps life hidden, waiting for someone to open the door." Tears welled in Aaron's eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He only nodded. "I see it, my son. I see it now." The light around Leif slowly dissolved into mist, but his image remained fading, yet still smiling. "You've opened the gate at last," he said. "Now you can rest." The wind swept through again, carrying a different scent: wood smoke, damp earth, the smell of life. Iran looked around and saw the snow on the table melting, dripping softly onto the floor. On the wall, the old painting of the fortress he had kept for memory's sake began to blur in the moisture. Everything seemed to be changing, stone turning into breath. He knew winter was retreating, making room for another season. Outside, the sun had fully risen. Its light streamed through the window, washing over him, warming the room, and in that moment, Aaron saw Leif's figure fade into the sunlight. But the boy didn't disappear, he was simply walking through the open gate. And as the wind whispered once more, Aaron smiled and murmured, "Go, my son. I'll follow when time calls." Aaron closed his eyes, leaning against the wall, the weary smile still resting on his lips. His body no longer felt the cold, only the stillness spreading slowly from his chest to his hands, then down to his toes. Time itself seemed to pause, giving him a rare moment of rest balanced between the fragile edge of life and fading away. Morning light streamed through the crack in the door, falling over his snow-covered silver hair. That light was no longer cold. It was warm, gentle, like a hand softly brushing over his head, assuring him that everything had come to an end. Outside, the wind had changed. It no longer screamed like a blade, but hummed low and deep, like the sigh of someone sleeping peacefully. Snowflakes drifted through the window, melting before they touched the ground, as if winter itself was bowing before the last gatekeeper. In his mind, memories flickered like faded film reels. His son's laughter in the snowy yard, his wife's voice singing their child to sleep, the glow of a fire in the small southern home, and the neigh of horses from the days when he was young and still believed that loyalty to the king was the highest honor. Now, all of it turned to mist, but it was warm mist, no longer heavy. He found himself standing in an endless white space, no more stone walls, no more locks or chains, only a soft light surrounding everything. In the distance, there was a narrow path leading toward the forest, the same one he had shown Rin. Aaron began to walk, each step light as air. The snow beneath his feet left no trace. He walked, not knowing how long, until he saw a figure waiting at the crest of a hill. The figure was small, familiar, dressed in a dark wool coat, and when it turned, he knew at once it was Leif. The boy's eyes shone like the dawn, and his smile was gentle. "Father," he said, "you finally came." Iran tried to answer, but no sound came, only a smile that carried all the words he had wanted to say for 20 years. Words of apology, of love, of a promise now complete. Leif stepped forward and took his hand. His hand was warm, truly warm like the first fire of winter. "I've waited for you so long," Leif said, "but I knew you'd come, not to run away but to come home." Aaron bowed his head, feeling tears burn at the corners of his eyes. "I kept my word, Leif," he said, his voice rough as wind. "I opened the gate." "I know," Leif smiled. "The gate wasn't just opened for Rin, but for you and for all the souls once trapped here. You don't owe anything anymore." Iran looked around and saw them shapes drifting through the mist, former prisoners, people he had once guarded, once sent to their deaths. They were no longer suffering, no longer chained. They walked toward the light, one by one, none of them looking back, leaving faint glowing footprints in the snow. One man paused, nodded to Iran, and said softly, "Thank you," before fading away. Iran felt lighter than he ever had before. Everything he had carried for so many years melted away like mist before dawn. "Do you have anything left to say?" Leif asked. Iran thought for a long time, then whispered, "Only this, that I did not live in vain." Leif nodded. "No one lives in vain if they've ever opened a door for someone else." They stood together in silence, gazing toward the horizon. The light was rising. The sky ahead blushed with the orange pink of morning. The wind carried the warmth of thawing earth. The first bird's call broke the silence, small, clear, a signal of a new season. Iran smiled, feeling warmth spread through him. He knew winter had gone, and so had he. He held his son's hand and looked back one last time at the fortress still standing, no longer fearful. There, his old body sat still, the faint smile untouched, the open ledger beside him. Iran turned again. The light ahead grew brighter, too bright to keep his eyes open. Leif's voice echoed faintly. "Come, father. Spring is here." And when his first step crossed into that light, he felt everything dissolve, sorrow, fear, even himself. There was no ending there, only return. Iran walked through the final gate, the one he had guarded all his life, and behind him, the snow stopped falling. When the soldiers returned, they found him slumped over, his hand still clutching the ring of keys, and beside him, the open ledger bearing 2 words, "Freedom." The morning light streamed through the crack in the door, falling across Iran's aged face, where a smile still lingered soft, like the last breath that had not yet faded. No one spoke. The entire room seemed frozen in that moment, broken only by the faint whisper of wind slipping through the cracks in the stone, gently stirring the few small flames still burning in the hearth. A young soldier stepped forward, gazing at him for a long while, then reached to take the keys from his stiffened hand. But when he tried, he realized the fingers were clenched too tightly, as if refusing to let go. He paused, staring at the calm face before him, and understood Iran wasn't holding on out of authority, but because it was the last piece of his life, a symbol of all he had once guarded, lost, and redeemed. The commander entered, his eyes deep and heavy as stone. He looked around the room. Everything was untouched, orderly, free from chaos or guilt. Slowly, he approached Iran, knelt beside him, and looked at the open ledger. The words "Rin," alive, and "freedom" lay in the sunlight, trembling slightly, as though written with breath instead of ink. For a moment, the commander saw not the handwriting of a traitor, but the prayer of a man who had finally found what was right. "Close the gate," he ordered quietly, yet firmly. "No one enters here again. This is no longer a cell, it's a resting place." The soldiers bowed their heads. None objected. They all knew the gatekeeper he had been, the embodiment of duty, the man who never left his post, who never let anyone pass without command. And now, he still kept the gate, only this time, it was open for his own soul. Another soldier stepped forward with a grey cloth to cover the body, but the commander raised his hand. "No," he said softly. "Let him see the sunrise." They obeyed in silence. Sunlight crept across the stone floor, climbing up the table until it touched Iran's fingertips. In that light, the keys glimmered, their metal reflecting against the wall, scattering faint sparks like tiny stars. A light breeze drifted through, turning a few pages of the ledger pages filled with names, dates, and fates. After so many years, those old lines meant nothing beside the final 2 words. One young soldier couldn't help but whisper, "He opened the gate for himself, didn't he?" The commander replied, "Perhaps. Or maybe he never needed to open it, he only needed the courage to walk away." They stood there quietly until the light filled the room. As they left, one of them stopped and placed a small stone on the table the way people do at the graves of those who kept their promises. Outside, the sky was clearing. Grey clouds drifted north, leaving a wide expanse of blue where birds began to return after the long winter. The fortress gate remained open, and through that empty space, Golden light poured in, spreading across the cold stone floor where the gatekeeper had once Saturday. Tiny specks of dust danced in the sunlight, like little souls in flight. Someone said they heard a faint metallic sound, not a sword, not a chain, but the soft clink of keys falling to the floor, light as a final breath closing. The commander turned toward the south. He didn't know whether Rin had survived, but something inside him whispered that the boy had made it through the forest, that he had seen the real Sunday. Some gates, he murmured, are never meant to be locked, and some gatekeepers never leave, they simply become the wind. The soldiers said nothing. They bowed their heads and stepped out, closing the door behind them with care. The iron door shut with a low, resonant echo like a final bell, tolling for Iran. Afterward, the room fell silent once more. Only the light remained, slanting through the doorway, illuminating the word freedom until it glowed like a torch. From outside, the wind slipped through the crack, gently turning the pages until it stopped in the middle on the line that still read, Rin, alive. And in that stillness, some swore they heard a faint whisper. No one knew from where, like the voice of an old man smiling as he said, guard the gate, not to imprison but to open. Rin survived, carrying the carved wooden piece of the gate and hanging it on his mother's door. The southern road took him through days that felt longer than a lifetime. The storm that night nearly killed him, the snow rose to his knees, the wind slashed his face like knives, and every breath burned in his lungs like fire. But Rin kept walking, and every time he fell, he heard Iran's voice. Go when the second bell rings. Don't look back. He had heard that bell, and from that moment there was only one path in his heart, the path out of darkness. When the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Rin was barely conscious. His clothes were soaked, his hands turned purple, his vision blurred by the cold. He collapsed in the forest, snow covering his body, and in the moment he thought he would die, he opened his eyes and saw a black crow perched on a branch. The crow let out a soft cry, then flew south. Rin understood Iran had sent the wind to guide him. He pushed himself up, following the bird's path. Each step was pain, but also a promise kept. Days later, when the wind shifted and the snow began to melt, Rin saw his village rooftops blanketed in ice, thin curls of smoke rising from bent chimneys. Dogs barked, voices carried from afar so familiar they ached in his chest. He took a few more steps before collapsing in front of the old house nestled beneath the hill. The wooden door was still there, faded and scarred, but still standing after all the storms. He knocked softly, no answer. He knocked again, and from inside came a trembling voice. Who's there? It's me, Mother. The door swung open, and the old woman with silver hair and dim eyes froze where she stood. Her hands trembled as she raised them to her face, unable to believe. Rin? He nodded, then fell into the snow. She rushed forward, catching him, tears mixing with the melting frost. You were dead, they said. They said you were executed as a traitor. No, Mother, Rin whispered. Someone saved me. She held him close, her frail shoulders shaking. He felt her warmth, the warmth of the house, of the small fire burning in the hearth. The scent of wood, of smoke, of home, made his throat tighten. When he opened his hand, the carved wooden piece fell, landing in his mother's palm. She looked at it, eyes widening. It's from the gatekeeper, Rin said. He opened the gate for me. He's gone now, but he kept his word. Her hands trembled as she touched the carving. The lines were rough, but deep, shaped like an open gate. She pressed it to her chest, tears dripping onto it. A stranger saved my son, she said. Then he wasn't a jailer, he was a keeper of promises. Rin nodded, smiling though his lips were still blue. He once had a son like me, who died in prison. Maybe, by saving me, he forgave himself. His mother looked at him, eyes filled with tears. Then I will keep this for him. She stood, went to the door, and hung the wooden piece on the old frame, tying it with a worn hemp cord. When the sunlight passed over the mountain, it struck the carving, making it glow like a small lantern. From that day on, every morning, Rin sat by the door, watching the wood sway gently in the wind. He never told the whole story, never spoke of the snow, or the wind, or the fortress. But in his eyes, people always saw something different, a piece that didn't belong to this world. Once, a village child asked. "Why is the gate open just a little and not closed?" Rin patted the boy's head and smiled. "Because some gates only open once, and only the brave dare to open them." The boy looked up. "Who opened it?" Rin was silent for a moment before replying. "A man who guarded it his whole life, but in the end realized that imprisonment isn't strength, it's fear of letting go." That year, spring came early. The ice melted, grass grew again on the hill, and birds sang all day. Whenever the wind blew from the north, the wooden piece swayed, making a faint clinking sound like keys brushing together. Sometimes Rin sat alone on the porch, listening to it, eyes closed. In the wind, he heard Aaron's voice faint but clear. "The gate belongs to you now. Don't let anyone close it." He smiled, looking up at the sky. That year, the sky was clearer than ever, as if all the snow had finally melted, leaving only the warmth of the gatekeeper, the man who taught him that even in the dead of winter, someone can still keep a small flame burning bright enough to guide another out of the dark. And every time the winter wind blows through the old fortress gate, people hear a whisper of gratitude. "Thank you, gatekeeper." The story of Iran spread across the north, though no one remembers who told it first. They only know that in a land where snow never melts, there stands an ancient stone fortress where the northern gate is no longer locked. It remains slightly open, letting the wind pass through, creating a sound that resembles a human voice. By day, it's just the howl of the wind. But at night, in the heart of the freezing darkness, those who pass by can hear a deep, raspy whisper, slow and steady, like the voice of an old man telling a story. "Keep your promise. Don't let the snow bury the last good thing." The villagers from the south say that if someone loses their way in a snowstorm, all they need to do is follow that sound, and the wind will guide them home. And strangely, no one has ever perished in a storm near the fortress. People began to call it the Gate of Freedom. Merchants passing by would stop and bow their heads. Young soldiers would remove their helmets in salute, and the village children would gather on thick, snowy nights to hear the elders tell the story of the gatekeeper. "Who was he?" one child would ask. The storyteller would smile, eyes glowing in the firelight. "He was the man who guarded hundreds of doors, but in the end, opened only one, and it led straight to the human heart." Another child would interrupt. "And did he die?" The storyteller would nod gently. "He left in peace, needing no one's pity, because he knew that beyond death, his son was waiting." Outside, the wind would howl harder, the fire flicker, and the children would fall silent. One small voice would ask, "What about the one he saved the prisoner? Did he ever come back?" The storyteller would pause, then say, "He did, but not to escape." "What do you mean?" "He lived. And sometimes, just living is how you come back." In the small village beneath the hill, the carved wooden piece of the gate still hung above Rin's door. Years later, when he had grown old, it was still there, darker now, its carvings worn but never broken. Every winter, Rin would light a fire and tell his children and grandchildren the story of the gatekeeper. His voice had grown weak, but it still carried that deep, steady rhythm, like a bell from the northern tower. "He once taught me," Rin would say, "that freedom doesn't come from running away, but from keeping your promise through the darkest night." The youngest grandchild would ask, "Grandpa, was the gatekeeper real?" Rin would look toward the doorway where the snow fell and smile. "Yes, but he's not in the fortress anymore. He's in the wind in everyone who dares to open their heart." When Rin passed, his family buried him beneath that same doorway, where the wooden carving still hung. They raised no gravestone, only etched faint words into the rock, for the one who was saved and the one who saved. Years went by. The village grew, then vanished from maps. The northern fortress crumbled halfway, sinking into snow, but the gate still stood, firm against the wind. And though time erased nearly everything, the whisper remained. Travelers still said that when night falls, if you stand before the gate and listen closely, you can hear two voices, one old, one young, mingling in the wind, like a conversation that never ended. "Father," you opened the gate. "I know, my son. Keep it open until there are no more winters." Everyone who passes stops for a moment, placing a hand on the cold metal, feeling warmth from within. Some say that sometimes the gate opens slightly on its own, creaking softly like a sigh. When it does, they know the wind is carrying the gatekeeper's soul home again. And if you're lucky enough to come there on a snowy night, when the sky is nothing but white and silence, you'll see a faint light glowing within the ruins, a lantern that never goes out, shining from the place where the gatekeeper once Saturday. They say it isn't fire, but a promise turned into light still burning, after hundreds of years, guiding those lost in their own darkness. The story ends there. But whenever the northern wind stirs and the distant bells echo through the frost, people still believe that somewhere out there, an old soul keeps watch over a gate between two worlds, where winter stops and freedom begins. If you're still listening, it means your heart is still beating in rhythm with the story. Hit subscribe to stay with me through the nights ahead, where the coldest mysteries are still waiting to be uncovered. And now, close your eyes, let the warmth of sleep wrap around you. Good night, and remember, winter isn't over yet.